admitted to us that his Homes for Heroes plan would not prioritise British veterans even over asylum seekers. Today I'll speak to a former SAS operative turned campaigner and a former squaddie who became homeless himself and even suicidal for their reaction to what they think is their final betrayal. And a diversity drive to ensure 50% of candidates for the Welsh Parliament are women has been rejected, and that caused the Social Justice Minister to go into a bizarre rant about white men. Trust me, they're not happy in the valleys. And 2 Rotherham child abuse victims were left out of court for the sentencing of their rapist. GBNews can exclusively reveal. I'll be joined by the journalist who broke that story, Charlie Peters, and also the child abuse campaigner Maggie Oliver, who feels that this latest sex abuse scandal is yet another example of victims not being put first. And that's all coming in between now and 6 p.m. We were never all in it together, were we? While we were locked down at home, people like Keir Starmer were lauding it in their mates' mansions, telling us what to do while on full pay. Harder, longer, faster, sooner lockdowns was their menu, while we were put in under lock and key. Does this latest revelation about this mansion really stick in your craw? It certainly does mine. Is this the one that makes you think there's just one rule for Keir Starmer, one rule for Boris Johnson, who, if you remember, was thrown out for the same sins, and certainly another rule for all of us? Let me know your thoughts. GBNews.com/your save. Now, your headlines. Here's Mark White.
Good afternoon. At 3:02, the main headlines from the GB News Centre. Scotland Yard has issued a call for any potential victims of Mohammed Al-Fayed to come forward. 5 women have claimed they were raped by the former Harrods owner, who died last year at the age of 94. A number of others say they were sexually assaulted by him. The current managing director of Harrods has apologised and said the business failed colleagues. Michael Ward, who worked for Al-Fayed for 4 years, said he was not aware of his criminality and abuse, but described it as a shameful period in the business's history. Israeli forces have carried out airstrikes in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, today. Well, you're looking at live images of southern Lebanon as intense cross-border fighting continues, with smoke and explosions on the horizon. Security sources said the strike on Beirut was aimed at targeting a senior Hezbollah commander. It comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon. The Lebanese Health Ministry claims 26 people were killed in today's strikes. Former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, believes despite the intense fighting, a ceasefire could be imminent.
I think it will happen in the next 72 hours. It takes some time. This is a very complex operation to get the scale of troop numbers that are required, although I'm sure the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, would have been preparing for this for some time.
The family of a teenager who was murdered in Wolverhampton have told a court they're devastated, totally heartbroken and confused. 2 12-year-old boys found guilty of murdering Sean Sisahai in a random machete attack are being sentenced this week. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old, who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a skull fracture in November last year. They're believed to be the youngest defendants convicted of murder in Britain since Robert Thompson and John Venables, both aged 11, were found guilty of killing 2-year-old James Bulger in 1993. A man's been charged with the murder of a 15-year-old boy who was stabbed with a zombie knife in southeast London. Dijon Campbell was found with a stab injury in Woolwich on Sunday evening. He died at the scene. 18-year-old Jacob Lozowicz has been charged in connection with his death. The Metropolitan Police says a second man in his 50s who was arrested has been released without charge. A family centre based in Southport with the building where 3 children died in a knife attack, will not return to the premises. Heartspace, which ran groups for new mothers and families, had been based at the Norwood Business Centre in the town's Hart Street. Founder Jenny Scholes said staff would never forget the events of July 29th and were heartbroken by what happened. The children had been taking part in a Taylor Swift-themed dance class at the venue when they were attacked and 3 young girls fatally injured. British, US and Australian defence ministers have been meeting in London to discuss ambitious plans to build the next generation of attack submarines. John Healey hosted US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin and Australia's Defence Minister Richard Marles as the Tri-Nation initiative takes the next step towards building the submarines. The Ministry of Defence says the deal to build nuclear-powered but conventionally armed attack submarines would help support more than 21,000 jobs in the UK alone. The Hollywood icon Dame Joan Collins has taken a swipe at extreme political correctness. Sitting down with GB News presenter Andrew Pearce, she said that she was no fan at all of woke culture.
Consider myself to be feminine and a feminist, and why should we be called female actors? I find it demeaning. I think it's gone out of control. Really, you can't say anything, people get offended. We've lost our British sense of humour.
And finally, an amber warning for heavy rain's been issued by the Met Office, warning of further flooding and travel disruption across large parts of the UK. The new alert covers the Midlands and parts of South West from 6 p.m. today until 6 a.m. tomorrow. The Met Office warns nearly 3 inches of rain could fall over several hours in the worst affected regions, with rivers continuing to rise and until the rain clears. Several yellow weather warnings are already currently in place for large parts of the country until 9 a.m. tomorrow. Well, it wouldn't be my news into the Martin Daubney Show without a good weather roundup. Stay in, wrap up warm and watch the man himself.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Bravo, Mark White, what a legend. Now then, Sir Keir Starmer is facing questions over why he failed to declare repeatedly using a donor's £18 million penthouse for his political purposes. He used Lord Ali's property to film a message calling more people to work from home when COVID guidelines were still in place. But was he really following the rules himself? Well, let's take a look now. That infamous video.
The new variant Omicron is spreading fast, and the argument that we don't know enough about it doesn't stack up. We may not be certain how dangerous it is, but we do know that lives are at risk. At times like this, we must all put the national interest first and play by the rules. Getting jabbed, wearing masks, and working from home if we can really will help prevent infections.
It's the pictures of his kids in the background that get me. Now, the Prime Minister is in the US at the moment, as he's meant to speak at the United Nations later on today. But this freebie scandal is surely overshadowing everything else. We can speak now with GB News' political editor, Chris Hope, who joins us live from the Big Apple. Talking of the Big Apple, Chris, things seem rotten to the core with the Labour Party. Nobody's talking about what Keir Starmer's doing in New York. Nobody's talking about what he's speaking about at the United Nations. Everybody's focus on this onward rolling scandal. Now, the latest one, of course, using the pictures of his children in the background in his mate's mansion, telling us to work from home under lock and key for lockdowns he wanted sooner, harder, longer, while he was swanning around a mansion. And it seems, once again, we were never all in it together, and the rules didn't apply to Keir Starmer.
Hello, Martin. Yeah, and great to see you again, coming to you live today from Times Square, where I'm following Sir Keir Starmer around New York as he meets with business leaders and and on the diplomatic trail. I think, you know, globally we have got Sir Keir Starmer trying to make two big cases here. He's pressing a case for a 3-week ceasefire to allow Britons to get out of Lebanon. There's a mass evacuation or trying to take place. We've got warships in the region as the fighting between Hezbollah and Israeli troops gets worse and worse. Separate to that, there's Ukraine, and that's a real problem. Trying to get the Zelensky's in the White House this lunchtime meeting with Joe Biden, Kamala Harris later on today. He's trying to get them to agree to sign off on using long-range missiles against Russia in Russia. They're UK-made, but they're navigated by American technology. Really important, and that's why Sir Keir Starmer is trying to make that case. We'll hear more of that, I think, when he addresses the UN General Assembly just after 10 p.m. tonight on GB News. A really important one there, the first Labour Prime Minister for 15 years, and a moment for him to introduce himself, I think, on the world stage in a formal setting. On the edges, on the margins of here in New York, he might try and meet with Donald Trump, who is in New York. It's a difficult one for him because he can't meet Kamala Harris, who's in Washington. He's never met Kamala Harris, and she might be the president after the election in November. But he's quite keen, I think, to meet with Trump, if only to try and urge him to back Ukraine if it becomes US president then. So that could happen. We saw them meet with Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president. That's ahead of a meeting next week in Brussels, which will be really important. While we're watching the Tory conference and the battle there for the leadership contenders, don't ignore Brussels. Sir Keir Starmer's going there to meet with Ursula von der Leyen. But overshadowing all of that, as you're saying, Martin, is the issue of freebies. This issue of Wahid Ali's flat. We saw Starmer staying there. He's owned up to that. He's talked about that. But he also did broadcast from there with family photos behind him. Not really clear why. But what they were told by Number 10 and his team is he didn't want to broadcast from home because of privacy reasons, and that's his home. So he did it from Wahid Ali's flat. And we'll be pressing him more when we see him later for GB News. But last night I asked him a question I think viewers and listeners may want to know. Why not just give back all of the free stuff you've had, the glasses, the suit, the clothing, like another Labour MP has been doing when she has sent gear free through the post or given to her. And here's what he had to say.
A Labour MP for South Shields, Emma Buck, gives her freebies to charity. He gives them away. Why won't you give things you've had for free back to charity or to a good cause?
Well, all that happened is I wanted somewhere safe and quiet for my son to do his GCSE preparation. I needed it to be secure because of the situation we were in. No exchange of money. There's nothing to give away.
There you have Martin. He's ignoring the question, just saying, look, I owned up everything. I've done what I can. What I did is out there, you know. And they are saying, by the way, just finally, they're not going to take any more freebies. But I think they will keep going to events, football events and the like, if only to meet investors who might invest heavily in the UK.
OK, Christo, thank you very much for ignoring my question for most of the thing there. Only joking, mate. Superb. Thanks for joining us. Speak to you again in the next hour. Now, joining me now is the former Labour spokesman, James Matthewson. James, I'm going to put it to you that, you know, nobody's talking about why Sir Keir Starmer is in New York. Nobody's really bothered about why he's in New York. This is a scandal that just won't go away. I've got to put it to you, how the Labour Party are not trying to just bat this into the long grass and actually get some positive news out there, because day after day after day, it's fresh scandal. Even the supportive media that willed Sir Keir Starmer into power aren't giving the guy a positive headline.
Yeah, Martin, it's not a good situation, but I do have to disagree on one thing. It's not all anyone's talking about. There are people talking about it in certain bubbles. There are people talking about it in many spaces. You're absolutely right, but not all of them the areas that the Labour Party or Keir Starmer's particularly bothered about, because they're not areas that, I mean, if you think about, you know, dispatches in the Telegraph, in the Spectator, in the Daily Mail, they're not particularly bothered about what those publications think because they've never supported them. So I think when they look at the support of media, like you say, there is some criticism. There is some, you know, criticism on the left of the Labour Party as well. But again, with the majority they're operating with, they're hoping that this will be a storm in a teacup. It is dragging its legs a bit, but I think that is because of the right-wing media and many elements of right-wing media wanting to keep it going for obvious reasons. You know, the Labour Party did the same when they were in opposition. They want to try and drag this out and extend it. But I do have to say it's fascinating hearing Conservatives kind of cry and moan about any kind of freebie gift, which, by the way, I think anybody taking them, it's questionable. But when we had Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, as you rightly pointed out, for
James, no, my friend, no. What's happening here is that the Labour Party, they were the ones who were wearing their hair shirts, they were sanctimonious, they were holier than thou. They were the ones who drove Boris Johnson out over cake, over wallpaper, over every freebie, over every scandal possible. The position of taking the moral high ground in opposition was the issue. Now they're in power. They're not only just the same as the previous lot, they're worse. Starmer's taken more freebies than any Prime Minister in modern history in terms of personal donations. He's Premier League, he's Champions League. He makes the rest look like Conference League. You have to admit, it's not about the right-wing media. It's about double standards. It's about hypocrisy and it's about sanctimony.
Well, I think you're right. I think there's questions to be asked. I just think the reason we're seeing it talked about so extensively is because of the reasons I've said. However, you are right, and there are questions to be asked because at the top of this chain are ministers and Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, who are rightly receiving this scrutiny. This hasn't started just when they've been in power, though, and this is the crucial thing. And for me, I have a kind of varied view on this because as long as it's registered, as long as it's there so people can see, and then people can crucially look at the people like Wahid Ali and say, what's he getting out of this? What's he gotten from this? Has he received government contracts? Will he ever receive government contracts? I would hope not, and that's when the scrutiny needs to be there. So as long as stuff is registered and it's visible, that's why the question with this flat and with the interview from the flat, the broadcast message from the flat is a bit strange, and why the images of the kids in the background as well. I have to agree with you on that. I don't think it's a great look, to say the least.
James Mathewson, thank you for being candid and thank you for being a good sport. It's always a pleasure to have on the show. Thank you very much, James Mathewson. Now, 2 Rotherham child abuse victims were left out of court for their sentencing of their rapists. GBNews can exclusively reveal. Our national reporter Charlie Peters has his exclusive and he joins me now in our studio in Westminster. Charlie, once again, a cracking story by you. You've been all over this story, making sure that survivors get the oxygen of publicity and the support they need. This is an astonishingly heavy-handed and leaden-footed oversight. Tell us what happened.
Well, it's a human error, an officer error, as the National Crime Agency put it to me, because last Friday, Neil King, a 51-year-old, was sentenced to 21 years imprisonment for 17 sexual offences he committed against 2 children. 16 years ago, they finally had this moment to achieve justice, to see their abuser being sent down for that lengthy and significant sentence. But unfortunately, due to an error by one of those National Crime Agency officers, they were left out of the courtroom for that critical moment. Now, I've spoken to several survivors about this story since we broke it this morning, and all of them say that being able to witness their abuser being sent away was a crucial part of that experience. Now, the NCA told me that they have personally apologised to both of those survivors. They're going to do further. They're going to write to them as well. And as I understand it, a judge who was involved in that sentencing last Friday did sit this morning to allow those survivors to come back to the court after they were missed last week to apologise to them and also to pay respect to their tributes for their efforts in the trial to achieve this justice that has been delivered.
Okay, Johnny will stay with us because joining us now is the former detective and Rochdale sex abuse ring whistleblower, the legendary Maggie Oliver. Maggie, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have your company. This is just another terrible, terrible indictment, is it not, of a system that seems to put the survivors last in the queue when it comes to who gets the lion's share of the attention, of the sympathy. And Maggie, it must be so, so important for those survivors to get their moment, to see their perpetrator go down, to have that so cruelly snatched away must be devastating, Maggie Oliver.
Yeah, good afternoon, Martin. No apology will ever make this right again. That was their moment. 16 years of perseverance, of pain, of fighting to have their abuser sent to prison. Now, as Charlie's just said, and Charlie's done a great job constantly shining the spotlight on not only the failures about grooming gang survivors, but about the system that we have in our country, which is really in so many ways unfit for purpose. I often say that victims and survivors are an afterthought in our criminal justice system. You know, when you think that a victim who has been through what these two young women have been through is referred to often as a witness, they are a commodity, they are useful, and yet at this moment in time when their rapist is going to be sentenced, they're forgotten about. You know, they are an afterthought, they are not part of the process, whereas the offender will have a whole army of people making sure he's in court, making sure his human rights are looked after. The system is broken. And, you know, the person responsible has made a mistake, but it shouldn't be left down to one person to make sure that the rights of those victims are being put at the top of the queue. The system should be looking after them. I mean, I worked in major crime for 16 years, and as a family liaison officer on many murders, my job was to make sure that the families were in the court, were looked after. My guess, and I'm looking at my experience as a police officer, is that these two young women were left on their own outside the courtroom. It might even have been someone from the witness service who forgot to take them in, but it's very clear that they were not a top priority. You know, a victim is useful at the beginning of a process when they give a victim, they give their interview, their video recorded interview. At the end, they are useful when they give evidence in court. In between those two moments in time, they are in many ways surplus to requirements. They're no longer needed once they've given their interview. But that moment for them was the moment they have waited for, probably for, you know, most of their lives. And I feel for them. I think it's a good thing that the judge is going to apologise, but nothing will make it right for them. And, you know, I would refer to the story that Charlie did the other week as well about the victim impact statement, where the court redacted or edited certain comments out of the victim's impact statement. Again, treating a victim as an afterthought and as somebody who is a little bit of an inconvenience actually in the process once the system has got what it wants from them. And I think it is unforgivable. It is another example of how we need to really rewrite the way we deal with victims of horrific child abuse.
Maggie, Charlie Peters is with me in the studio. He'd like to ask you a question.
Maggie, you've just raised that we've spoken twice in the last couple of weeks about failures coming out of Sheffield Crown Court with regards to survivors of child sexual exploitation. That survivor having their testimony censored by a judge, and now two survivors being left out of the courtroom. Why do you think that victims are not being put central to the judicial process?
You know what, Charlie, if I'm being perfectly honest, they're seen as a nuisance. You know, in my charity, in the Maggie Oliver Foundation, we advocate for victims who are treated often despicably. And the system doesn't recognise them as being important. They are seen as a commodity. You know, they are flavour of the month at the start of a big job because the system needs their testimony in order to take an abuser to court or a murderer to court. But once that testimony is gathered, they don't get regular updates. They don't have an officer looking after their needs. They are very often left to their own devices. They can't get information. They don't have one point of contact. Officers move on and they're left to start all over again with a new person. You know, this is not an isolated case. You know, on the Rochdale case that you mentioned, the young girl Ruby, whose abuser was released from court, she didn't even know he was out of prison. These are all examples of what is repeated failures to recognise the needs of victims and survivors. They deserve to be heard, to be treated with respect, to have their human rights considered in all of these processes. But sadly, the rights of the offenders, of the abusers, are top of the pile. You know, they are flavour of the month. They, you know, everything is done to safeguard their rights. Where are the rights of the victims? And nobody saying sorry will ever be able to put this right for those two young women. That moment is gone. It's better that they do get an apology, but it will never make up for what they have lost last week. And I am really, really sad about that. An apology are empty words, really. It should have been planned for. It should have been a given that there would be people there to make sure that those two women were in there, were looked after, were supported, not just by one officer who happened to forget. It might not even have been an officer who forgot. It could have been the witness service. I don't know. But whoever forgot, it's just not good enough. And I'm really sad for those two young women. I really do feel for them. I only hope that when their victim impact statement is read, if it is read, that's not redacted, and that they are allowed to give their thoughts and their feelings about what's happened to them and how they've been treated.
OK, Maggie Oliver, thank you so much for joining us and for your tireless work. And thank you, Charlie Peters, another fantastic exclusive. Thank to both of you. Now, well-behaved prisoners may go free from jail early under Texas-style measures to cut down overcrowding. We'll have that next. I'll speak to a con after the break.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, you didn't say that, though. I'm so surprised. I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Michael Sheen talks about how he was wearing false teeth and wigs and whatever else to play this part. How's it gone down over that side of the pond?
I mean, I have to tell you, I absolutely loved it. I'm seeing everybody else there. They think it's a hoot, but Ben and Anne, it is very funny. And you walk away from it thinking that was great television. But is that appropriate when you think about the fact that it's associated with Jeffrey Epstein? You know, after it was over, I thought, I'm going to say good things about this. But the further I get away from it, the more I think, but what about these women that were violated by Jeffrey Epstein when they turned on the television? Were they laughing? Did they see the humor in it? Or are they horrified that it's become a joke?
The dialogue seemed very stilted and expositional, I thought. But then you think, well, that's clearly what they were trying to achieve. And it wasn't a documentary, it was a drama. And some bits were clearly made up.
Absolutely. I mean, when you watch the princesses crying, when you watch the princesses making decisions behind the scenes, it's very compelling television. And you have to remind yourself, similar to The Crown, that you are watching something based on a true story, but has been greatly exaggerated for entertainment value. And I initially thought, oh, this is horrible for Prince Andrew. And it is. But at the same time, I think that sometimes these pieces make the royal family a little bit more relevant. They introduce new people, and people are now watching them a little more closely. And I think it's a double-edged sword. It can be both things. It can be bad. It can be good for the royal family.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Welcome back, 3:29. Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, the current managing director of Harrods is apologising for failing his colleagues after sexual misconduct allegations to do with the former owner, Mohammed Al Fayed. I'm joined now by GB News' correspondent Cameron Walker to fill us in on the story. Cameron.
Yes, so just to recap, Mohammed Al Fayed, the former chairman of Harrods, there are several allegations from several women who allege that he sexually abused them when he was in charge. Now, the Metropolitan Police this afternoon has come out out with a statement calling on further victims who feel they may be a victim of Al Fayed's abuse to come forward and speak to them. The police have been in contact with the lawyers of those representing the women who have already come forward, and they say that specially trained officers will be looking after anybody who has allegations against Mr. Fayed. Now, clearly, Al Fayed died last year. He was 94 years old, so he cannot be criminally prosecuted for any of this. However, the police also confirmed this afternoon, and this is quite crucial, that any potential associates of Al Fayed could potentially be liable for criminal prosecution. So they are investigating. No charges have been brought at this stage. Commander Stephen Clayman saying it is vital that any victim feels they have a voice. He also reiterates that anyone with an allegation will be taken extremely seriously. And of course, this statement comes after the Crown Prosecution Service failed to prosecute Al Fayed during his lifetime twice. The Metropolitan Police presented them with evidence twice, once for an alleged indecent assault of a 15-year-old girl in 2008, another alleged rape in 2013 by a separate lady. And as you said in your introduction, the current Harrods director, Michael Ward, has released a statement saying that Harrods failed our colleagues. He also went on to say that Al Fayed presided over a toxic culture of secrecy, intimidation, fear of repercussion and sexual misconduct. And he said, Mr. Ward, who worked for Fayed actually for 4 years while Fayed was still alive, he was not aware of his criminality or abuse and described it as a shameful period in the business's history. The General Medical Council has also released a statement confirming they are investigating. That's because 2 private doctors who worked for Mr. Fayed allegedly conducted intrusive and unnecessary sexual STI examinations on Fayed's alleged victims. So Al Fayed may be dead, but of course there could be several associates of him which may have to answer some questions.
And the long road for justice starts now. Thank you very much, Charlie Peters, for that summary. There's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock, including are Labour plotting a blitz on our boozers? Not on my watch. But first, here's your headlines, and it's that man again, Mark White.
Good afternoon. At 3:32, the latest news from the GB News Centre. Scotland Yard has issued a call for any potential victims of Mohammed Al Fayed to come forward. 5 women have claimed they were raped by the former Harrods owner, who died last year at the age of 94. A number of others say they were sexually assaulted by him. The current managing director of Harrods has apologised and said the business failed colleagues. Michael Ward, who was working for Al Fayed for 4 years, said he was not aware of his criminality and abuse, but described it as a shameful period in the business's history. Israeli forces have carried out airstrikes in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, today. Well, you're currently looking at live images of southern Lebanon as intense cross-border fighting continues, and we can clearly see smoke rising from a number of those buildings in the town of Tyre. Security sources said the strike on Beirut was aimed at targeting a senior Hezbollah leader. It comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon. The Lebanese Health Ministry claims 26 people were killed in today's strikes. The family of a teenager who was murdered in Wolverhampton have told a court they're devastated, totally heartbroken and confused. 2 12-year-old boys found guilty of murdering Sean Sisahai in a random machete attack are being sentenced this week. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old, who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a fractured skull in November last year. They're believed to be the youngest defendants convicted of murder in Britain since Robert Thompson and John Venables, both aged 11, were found guilty of killing 2-year-old James Bulger in 1993. British, US and Australian defence ministers are meeting in London to discuss ambitious plans to build the next generation of attack submarines. John Healey hosted US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin and Australia's Defence Minister Richard Marles as the Tri-Nation initiative takes the next step towards building the submarines. The Ministry of Defence says the deal to build nuclear-powered but conventionally armed attack submarines would help support more than 21,000 jobs in the UK alone. Finally, the Hollywood icon Dame Joan Collins has taken a swipe at extreme political correctness. Speaking to GB News presenter Andrew Pearce, she said she definitely was not a fan of woke culture.
Consider myself to be feminine and a feminist, and why should we be called female actors? I find it demeaning. I think it's gone out of control. Really, you can't say anything, people get offended. We've lost our British sense of humour.
Quite right, Dame Joan. And that is your headlines for the moment. We're back in half an hour from one Hollywood icon, not me, Dame Joan. It's over to a broadcast news icon, Martin Daubney.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Oh, Mark White, the cheques in the post. Now, if you want to get in touch, please go to gbnews.com/your say and make sure to read out the best of your messages a little later in the show. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Business News Channel.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Yet more rain to come for many of us during the rest of the day and overnight. Very heavy in some places and at a risk of flooding, particularly for those areas that were flooded earlier in the week. And that's because this front, which has been bringing persistent rain to Northern Ireland and Northern England through the day, moves south during the evening and merges with an area of intense thundery downpours across Wales and central England. And as that happens, in just a few hours, we could see 40 to 60 millimetres of additional rain on top of what we saw last weekend and the start of this week. So an amber warning in force, risk of localised flooding, risk of transport disruption as we begin the day on Friday. Now, by dawn, the wettest conditions will be moving south, so affecting Kent, Sussex, perhaps parts of Hampshire, as well as heavy showers move in from the Channel. It does begin to dry up elsewhere and clearer skies coming through across Wales, Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. A cold start to the day here under those clear skies. A few showers for northern Scotland, but in between there will be bright skies, and we keep that cold wind in Scotland, but during the morning it extends further south. And it does help to clear the rain, so we say farewell to that by mid to late morning. But, well, it's going to feel chilly as that northerly wind sets in. There'll be further showers carried through on that wind, predominantly across northern and western coast, but a few popping up inland as well. Temperatures of 14 or 15 Celsius, though, not feeling particularly warm at all. And then into the evening, the showers inland tend to ease away. Lengthy clear spells developing away from northern and western coast where those showers will carry on. And where we've got the clear skies inland, of course, temperatures will drop. A touch of ground frost possible first thing this weekend, so a chilly start, but a fine day for many on Saturday before more wind and rain arrives from the west on Sunday.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. There's some issues for the M40 this afternoon. Firstly, southbound is closed at Stoke-on-Church Junction 5 and queuing. A collision causing delays on both sides of the carriageway. Northbound side 9 to 10, Bicester to Brackley. A lane shut for a collision there. The queue's back to the A34 turn off. Multiple issues for the M25 this afternoon. Anti-clock, a big queue 2 miles before Romford 29. It slowed towards the scene of an earlier closure at Brentwood 28. All the lanes are open, but it's still very slow going. Both sides of the M25 are currently closed. Sevenoaks at 5 to Godstone at 6. Big queues either side whilst a collision gets sorted out. And that means the M26 is also closed for the same reason. It's shut between the M25 Junction 3 through towards Junction 5 as well. And for now, that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 3:39. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer told GB News that he cannot guarantee that veterans will be placed ahead of other groups in housing waiting lists, including, astonishingly, asylum seekers. Now, he spoke to our political editor, Chris Hope, and let's take a look at what he said.
It's a very important commitment that we've made because too many veterans who have, given so much to their country find themselves without a roof over their head. So because we've taken the difficult decisions on planning, decisions that were not taken for years, we can guarantee that they will have a roof over their heads. So Homes for Heroes becomes a reality and not just a slogan.
Ahead of other groups, so important.
Yeah, that will require regulation to be passed to make that priority. But it's not ahead of all other groups. This is unlocking, a real step forward on homelessness for many people who are homeless.
Well, there we go. And joining me now to discuss this is Matthew Hellier, a former member of the Special Forces and the chief executive of the Pilgrim Bandits charity, which supports wounded, injured and sick veterans. Welcome to the show. An absolute delight to have you on, Matthew. We were very, very excited, I'm sure you were too, when the Homes for Heroes initiative was announced. At last, we felt there'd be priority support for veterans, much, much needed. People who went to war for their country, prepared to die, should be at the front of the queue. That, however, transpired isn't the case. The Prime Minister confessed to us yesterday on the show that even asylum seekers could be put ahead of veterans. How does that make you feel?
Well, as soon as I heard, I thought it was either hot air or hot news. And as it transpires, it's hot air. As we know, veterans, they struggle with their resettlement process coming out of the military. And Sir Keir is just trying to appease another part of our community with false promises. They've not thought into it enough. There's no plans and there's no policies to do this at all. It's just talk.
And Matthew, what would you like to have seen done instead? I mean, you help former servicemen and women who are on their knees, who need help. You know their specific requirements. You've served in the forces at the very highest level. You command their respect. You're not on Civvy Street. What would you do? How would you have ran this Home for Heroes policy?
Well, this comes straight down to grassroots. We need to get the resettlement and the recruitment done correctly. We are not doing it correctly. Resettlement means health, medical, dental, and then housing. And then when we get the housing correct, then we can launch veterans into the workforce. But just by putting them into a house is not, or promising to put them in a house, does not, it is not providing a solution. There are over 500 veteran families being evicted every 3 months in this country. Keir Starmer and his Office for Veterans Affairs just have not got their statistics right. They don't know their job and they need to knuckle down and find out what is actually needed.
And in terms of the emotional impacts, I mean, we had a former serviceman on the show yesterday. We're having another couple later in the show, and I've been contacted by veteran friends of mine who just feel like they've been used almost as like a political pawn. Homes for Heroes, of course, is a phrase that Lloyd George commanded in 1918, directly after World War I. It was specifically and deliberately meant to house and help people who'd been to war, many of whom were very, very badly injured. Just to adopt that phrase in itself, but to apply to care workers, to domestic abuse survivors, as important as they are. Do you feel, Matthew, there's a sense that veterans here have just been used as a pawn in the policy?
100%. He's just trying to appease the population. He's trying to win votes over the veteran community, and he just isn't doing it. There are more pressing problems that we need to address. We need to address the resettlement, really. We need to look at the medical stuff. We need to look at the dental stuff. And then we look at the housing. And, there is just too many veterans that are sofa surfing, that are sleeping on families' sofas. They're getting looked after by, friends and family. We really need to grab this.
And Matthew, we know that Number 10 watch this show. They don't always enjoy it because we give them, unfettered messaging. If you would say a message to Sir Keir Starmer, if you wanted to pass a message on to the Prime Minister, what would you say to him?
We have a lot of empty buildings in the big cities. Let's start looking at putting these veterans into the empty buildings. Homeless veterans can't claim benefits. OK, and I think Sir Keir is a little bit worried about that. If we give people a door number, give them a unit that they can live from, then they can start claiming benefits. They can start contributing to part of this community. And then we can start having a concerted effort through all of the charities. We know where they are. We can then help homeless veterans. And we can push them up the ladder and give them the respect they all deserve.
Matthew, I'm absolutely speechless that homeless veterans can't claim benefits or fund. Is that true?
It's true. Without an address, you can't claim any benefits, can you? So our homeless veterans are being, like I said, 500 veterans being pushed out of the houses every 3 months. It's an absolute tragedy in this country. OK, it needs to be addressed. But as I said, there are programmes out there. We need to look at the empty buildings. We need to come to some sort of solution. We need to give people a door number, an address, and then they can claim benefits. The charities can then use the concerted effort, get around these people, give them the needs that they want, and we can just push them up the ladder. They will become good members of the community, contributing to this country. At the moment, they're not getting the choice. They're not getting it. They're injured. Their mental health are suffering. Everything like that is just compounded against them.
Matthew Hallier, you're an inspiring man. I'd vote for you. We've got to get together and try and do something about this, mate. Why don't we exchange details after this and try and get something going? Because I'm connected politically. You know your stuff. Why don't we try and get something going, mate? Would you be up for that?
100%. Let's do it.
Let's do it, man. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Amazing stuff, Matthew Hallier. Absolute delight to talk to you. I'm just absolutely gobsmacked about that, but there we go. That's the country we live in. Now, still to come, are Labour plotting a blitz on our boozers? Not on my watch. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
But let's get stuck in. Prince Harry, he's consulted former aides about a possible partial return to the UK as he seeks to repair his public image, that is according to the Daily Mail.
Who wants him? I'm sorry. This is, of course, he's got his book Spare. The paperback comes out later this year. Now, he's not updating it, but he'll want to promote it.
Yeah, absolutely.
He says he's not doing any interviews, but we're talking about him now, we're talking about Spare.
Yeah.
And is he going to come back with his wife? What about the children? Because apparently it's not safe for his wife and children in this country, according to Harry, even though he took his wife to Colombia, which is much less safe than Britain, in my view.
It's absurd. Anyway, he was able to attend his uncle's funeral quite easily.
He did.
Nobody knew he was coming. He said he wasn't, and then he did. And he was perfectly safe.
And he would have had the same security as every other member of the royal family who attended that event.
Yeah.
But, of course, he didn't speak to his brother at the funeral.
No, he wouldn't, would he?
So if he's trying to fix it, honestly, a funeral is where you should put all differences aside.
Yeah.
Because it's not about you, it's about respect to the person, the family of the person who's gone, which was his uncle. It was his... Diana's sister's husband had died. So, yet they didn't speak. They didn't speak in the church, they didn't speak when they left the church. Incredible, isn't it?
It's awful because that moment is when you realise that we are all mortal. And at that point, all other things should transcend that, but not...
Well, this move is being branded as Operation Bring Harry In From the Cold, because apparently he's a bit fed up with his life in Montecito. Does that mean with his wife?
I don't know.
Oh, no. Apparently he's dissatisfied with advice from his American-based image expert.
Well, they've had about 10 of them, haven't they? They're on to their number 11.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Britain I grew up in was the most peaceful, gentle society that has ever existed. That has been destroyed.
Opinion polls show immigration is the #1 concern to the British public. Are you proud to be British?
Yeah, I'm ever so proud.
My name is Stephen Edgington, and in this documentary, I want to find out how Britain became a nation of immigrants. Immigration, the truth, available at gbnews.com.
Welcome back. It's 10 to 4. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. I don't know if you just missed that astonishing segment we had with the former SAS operative who was offering to get involved with us here at GB News to draw up a robust and effective plan for helping homeless veterans. I was absolutely blown away by it because, as we revealed yesterday on the show, Sir Keir Starmer, when we specifically asked him about the Homes for Heroes scheme, can armed service veterans jump the queue to make sure they're prioritised to get the help they need? And the Prime Minister said to us, no, that's not the case. It can't be allowed to happen. Now, that struck me as an absolute travesty, and it certainly isn't the sort of thing that we should be doing, I believe, in this country. We should be putting these guys to the front of the queue, and it is not happening. Now, Matthew Hellier, former SAS man, said to us, he wants to help us set up a proper scheme, and I think I need to take him up on the offer. Every time we get servicemen, servicewomen in here and tell us their stories, it's just heartbreaking. I had no idea that armed service veterans can't claim any form of benefits if they're homeless. I get it. If you're homeless, you haven't got a fixed abode, you can't claim benefits as a blanket solution. But surely, if you've served for your country, been prepared to die for your country, there should be a way around that. Surely, we've got to a point where we just have to do something about this. We have to take action. This cannot be allowed to carry on any longer. There are so many people out there so heartbroken about the fact that armed service veterans seem to be completely used as political pawns, as they were, many believe, by Sir Keir Starmer this week. And we just need more robust solutions in place. We have to do that. And trust me, we're going to get our act together here at GB News. I'm going to personally get on it. Now, another of my favourite topics, pubs. Because pub goers and smokers face being hit by a budget sin tax raid in a bid to fill the £22 billion black hole in public finances. Now, Chancellor Rachel Reeves is reportedly considering hiking the price of a pint of beer or cider and even a shot of spirits to try and fill that black hole. But could this be a crushing blow for our boozers? Now, it seems to me that previous governments have had a war on drugs. This mob, there's a war on pubs. There's a war on fun. 1 minute, they're banning you having a crafty fag outside in a pub garden or outside a football ground or outside a music venue anywhere. They say it's for the good of the public health. They say it's to bring down the bill on the NHS. And now it looks like they got their eye on our pubs. At the Labour conference this week, the health minister was briefing out they might close the pubs early. That's one of the few decent things Tony Blair did, bringing in continental-style drinking in Britain. This lot seem to want to turn the clock back to the 1970s, when my dad told me you had to queue to get in a pub. And then you'd go home, have a sleep, go back to the pub in the evening. Do we want to go back to those sort of days? Well, they said they weren't going to do that. They were forced to do a U-turn. But people in the industry come on the show all the time and tell me they're on their knees. They want to have some VAT help, some business rate help. And instead, it looks like we could be heading for another Puritan budget in October, harsh on pensioners, harsh on pub goers. And even if you're a pensioner who goes down a pub where you go for company, you go to keep warm, it looks like you'll be getting the rough end of the pineapple from this government. Look at this for a statistic. Currently, 35% of hospitality businesses in the United Kingdom don't even make a profit, and 500 pubs are closing alone last year. Now, this is something we need to talk about in the next hour. I'm going to be joined by a landlord who's going to tell me what his plans are to solve this problem, save our boozers. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is under fresh fire, this time for faking Lord Addy's £18 million mansion was his lockdown workplace. Is this the final blow for Sir Keir Starmer's credibility, the Prime Minister of hypocrisy? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel. Here's your weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Yet more rain to come for many of us during the rest of the day and overnight. Very heavy in some places and at a risk of flooding, particularly for those areas that were flooded earlier in the week. And that's because this front, which has been bringing persistent rain to Northern Ireland and Northern England through the day, moves south during the evening and merges with an area of intense thundery downpours across Wales and central England. And as that happens, in just a few hours, we could see 40 to 60 millimetres of additional rain on top of what we saw last weekend and the start of this week. So an amber warning in force, risk of localised flooding, risk of transport disruption as we begin the day on Friday. Now, by dawn, the wettest conditions will be moving south, so affecting Kent, Sussex, perhaps parts of Hampshire, as well as heavy showers move in from the Channel. It does begin to dry up elsewhere and clearer skies coming through across Wales, Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. A cold start to the day here under those clear skies. A few showers for northern Scotland, but in between there will be bright skies, and we keep that cold wind in Scotland, but during the morning it extends further south. And it does help to clear the rain, so we say farewell to that by mid to late morning. But, well, it's going to feel chilly as that northerly wind sets in. There'll be further showers carried through on that wind, predominantly across northern and western coast, but a few popping up inland as well. Temperatures of 14 or 15 Celsius, though, not feeling particularly warm at all. And then into the evening, the showers inland tend to ease away, lengthy clear spells developing away from northern and western coast where those showers will carry on. And where we've got the clear skies inland, of course, temperatures will drop. A touch of ground frost possible first thing this weekend, so a chilly start, but a fine day for many on Saturday before more wind and rain arrives from the west on Sunday.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News. The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Clockwise M60 Barton to Eccles, 11 to 12's queuing, a lane shut at the scene of an accident. Southbound M6 straggling too, Middlewich 18 to 17, there's a breakdown causing queues and a lane blocked. South Wales, north of Swansea, eastbound M4, junction 45 to 44 Llansamlet's queuing, that's partially blocked too at the scene of a collision. Now, the earlier collision on the M25 means the carriageway is still shut both ways, Sevenoaks at 5 to Godstone at 6, major queues either side. Coastbound M26 from the M25 towards Rotherham at 2 is closed and queuing at the scene of a collision. And heading toward London on the M26, just from junction 3 through towards the M25 at 5, that's also closed and queuing again, and that's due to an accident there.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good luck. It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan Tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very, very good afternoon to you. It's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. We're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK.
Wearing masks and working from home if we can really will help prevent infections.
Well, once again, Sir Keir Starmer is under fresh fire. This time for faking Lord Ali's £18 million mansion was his lockdown workplace, resplendent with pictures of his kids in the background. Look. Now, with his backbenchers and even his supportive media turning on him, is this the final blow for Starmer's credibility? The Prime Minister of hypocrisy. And on yesterday's show, Sir Keir Starmer exclusively admitted to us that his Homes for Heroes plan would not prioritise British veterans over even asylum seekers. Today, I'll speak to a former SAS soldier turned campaigner and a former squaddie who became homeless and suicidal for their reaction to what they call their final betrayal. And a diversity drive to ensure that 50% of candidates for the Welsh Parliament are women has been rejected. And that caused the Social Justice Minister to go into a bizarre rant about white men. Take it from me, they're not happy in the valleys. Welcome to the show. Always a pleasure to have your company. So we were never really in it together, were we? The politicians told us to live under lock and key. They were all at it. They were either eating cake, they were having parties or gallivanting around £18 million mansions. But we weren't in it together, and they seemed to live by a very, very different set of rules. Those rules did for Boris Johnson, cake and then wallpaper did for him. And it was Sir Keir Starmer leading the clarion call to get rid of Boris. And look, isn't he just doing exactly the same stuff? During lockdown, he was in the mansion loaned to him by Lord Ali, telling us we all had to stay safe at home. Well, you weren't even at home, were you? You're in your mate's mansion. And now there's just fresh allegations every single day about giveaways, about cronyism. I want to hear from you. Is the Prime Minister fit to rule? Or is this just the Prime Minister of hypocrisy, the sanctimonious leader who gives us one way to live and then lives himself by quite another set of rules? Get in touch, GBNews.com/your say. Now, it's your headlines. Here's Mark White.
It's 4:02. The latest headlines from the GB News Centre. Scotland Yard has issued a call for any potential victims of Mohammed Al-Fayed to come forward. 5 women have claimed they were raped by the former Harrods owner, who died last year at the age of 94. A number of others say they were sexually assaulted by him. The current managing director of Harrods has apologised and said the business failed colleagues. Michael Ward, who worked for Mohammed Al-Fayed for 4 years, said he was not aware of his criminality and abuse, but described it as a shameful period in Harrods' history. The family of a teenager who was murdered in Wolverhampton have told a court they're devastated, totally heartbroken and confused. 2 12-year-old boys found guilty of murdering Sean Sisahai in a random machete attack are being sentenced this week. From Nottingham Crown Court, our reporter Will Hollis has the latest.
In the beginning of a 2-day sentencing here in Nottingham, the 2 boys, who are now aged 13 years old, heard how the machete killing that made them the UK's youngest knife murderers affected their victim Sean Sisahai's family. The family, in a statement read out in court today, said losing a child is a parent's worst nightmare. The family is devastated and totally heartbroken. They described Sean as confident and always honest, a brave soul. Mrs. Justice Tipples will hand down her sentence tomorrow to the 2 teenagers whose identities remain anonymous.
Israeli forces have carried out airstrikes in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, today. We are looking at live images of southern Lebanon at the moment. Camera looking up into the sky with puffs of smoke from more explosions from Israel's Iron Dome defence system as more rockets have been sent from the terror group Hezbollah into northern Israel. There is intense cross-border fighting once again. Security sources said the strike on Beirut was aimed at targeting a senior Hezbollah leader. It comes as the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon. The Lebanese Health Ministry claims that 26 people have been killed so far in today's strikes. Well, the former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, believes that despite the intense fighting, a ceasefire could be imminent.
I think it will happen in the next 72 hours. It takes some time. This is a very complex operation to get the scale of troop numbers that are required, although I'm sure the IDF, the Israeli Defence Forces, would have been preparing for this for some time.
British, US and Australian defence ministers are meeting in London to discuss ambitious plans to build the next generation of attack submarines. John Healey hosted US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin and Australia's Defence Minister Richard Marles as the Tri-Nation Initiative takes the next step towards building the submarines. The Ministry of Defence says the deal to build nuclear-powered but conventionally armed attack submarines would help support more than 21,000 jobs in the UK alone. Well, the UK Defence Secretary said the partnership was vital in an increasingly volatile world.
We have held these discussions under a cloud of growing global insecurity. So in our trilateral and in our bilateral meetings, we've reinforced the need to stand together against Russian aggression, towards peace in the Middle East, and steadfast behind Ukraine for as long as it takes.
And finally, an amber warning for heavy rain has been issued by the Met Office, warning of further flooding and travel disruption across large parts of the UK. The new alert covers the Midlands and parts of South West from 6 p.m. today until 6 a.m. tomorrow. The Met Office warns nearly 3 inches of rain could fall over several hours in the worst affected regions. Several yellow weather warnings are already in place for large parts of the country until 9 a.m. tomorrow. So I'll definitely be taking my brolly to work tomorrow. That's your headlines for the moment. I'm back in half an hour. Now back to Martin Daubney.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much, Mark White. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is facing fresh questions over why he failed to declare repeatedly using a donor's £18 million penthouse for his own political purposes. He used Lord Ali's property to film a message calling for more people to work from home when COVID guidelines were still in place. But was he really following the rules himself? Well, let's have a little peek at that infamous video now.
The new variant Omicron is spreading fast, and the argument that we don't know enough about it doesn't stack up. We may not be certain how dangerous it is, but we do know that lives are at risk. At times like this, we must all put the national interest first and play by the rules. Getting jabbed, wearing masks, and working from home if we can really will help prevent infections.
You know what really gets me about that are the pictures of his kids in the background to try and make out that it's his house, when now we know it simply wasn't. And to discuss this further, I'm joined by the former Labour Minister, Sean Simon. Sean, welcome to the show. Let's be honest, Sir Keir Starmer is in New York. We should be talking about this historic trip to the UN. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody cares about it. Even the supportive media that Sir Keir Starmer was urged into power by cannot give the guy a single positive headline, and that's because of the very basic fact that all the time when Sir Keir Starmer was leader of the opposition, he was attacking Boris Johnson over breaking the rules, over wallpaper, over taking gifts, over cronyism. He's doing exactly the same stuff as Boris Johnson. Now he's the Prime Minister, and many people are starting to say he is the Prime Minister of hypocrisy. What's your take?
You've never been a big fan of Keir Starmer, have you, Martin? Let's be honest.
A big fan of Boris.
The truth is he's done absolutely nothing wrong. As far as we know, he hasn't broken any rules. He hasn't done anything wrong. I don't think he was trying to make that look like his house. He's sitting at a desk. He's sitting at a desk with a row of shelves behind, which is what you do.
He's got photos of his kids in the background.
It's what you do if you're trying to make something look like an office. Have you not got photos of your kids in your office? I've hardly ever been into an office that doesn't got photo of people's kids in it. It's a standard.
So that was his office now, was it? That was his office now, was it? Okay.
You're a TV journalist, Martin. If you go to somebody's office and they want to make it look like their house, what do you say? You say, "Oh, let's have you in an armchair. Let's have you by the fireside. Let's have you in the kitchen." You don't say.
It was a video. It was a video about working from home.
What's behind you? He's actually trying to make it look like an office. And
it was a video about working from home, mate.
It wasn't about working from home. He wasn't pretending to be working from home. He mentioned working from home in passing in the course of a long broadcast. We have no idea, and like you have no idea why he was doing that. Why didn't he just use his office in the House of Commons?
Good point. Why didn't he?
Well, I have no idea, but why assume that there is a bad reason, and why make it out like he's done something? How on earth has he gained gained anything bad by doing this broadcast from somebody else's desk, like a mile down the road, instead of from his own desk in the House of Commons?
Because he got caught.
How do we think he's gained? And also, why do we think he clearly hadn't broken any rules? I'd be very, very surprised if that wasn't recorded before the COVID restrictions came in. Downing Street said very clearly on the record, they're absolutely certain they didn't break any COVID rules. So why assume that he has? Why carry on as though he's banged to rights for breaking the rules when he hasn't broken any rules at all?
Well, for the precise and obvious reason, Sean, that if this had been a Conservative, you'd be absolutely calling for them to be tried at dawn. You know you would.
They were breaking the rules. They were arrested. They were given fixed penalty notices. They were bang out. Starmer hasn't broken any rules.
Sean, you know full well, come on, you know full well that this is a bad look for the Prime Minister, and you know full well that you would be demanding the resignations at dawn, in a long and sinuous line. If they were Conservatives, you would. And that's the point. This is about double standards. It's about hypocrisy. Now Sir Keir Starmer is the Prime Minister. Surely. There's nowhere to hide. And the rules, in the eyes of the public, looking at this, they just don't seem to apply to Keir Starmer. Taking suits, taking glasses, passes for glasses, free Fox for the missus, £8,000 tickets to the Premier League, Taylor Swift gigs. These are sort of things that the Labour Party hated when the Tories did it.
This is you're just literally making up headlines, and I accept it. It's knockabout. It makes good TV. It makes a good joke down the pub, and I do accept that the suits and the glasses and all that kind of stuff is not a good look. And I think it was naive that they ended up in that situation. I don't think he broke any rules, or he broke one very small rule by being slightly late in proactively going to declare it and asking twice and blah, blah, blah. He didn't really break any rules, and he didn't do anything that everybody else doesn't do. But nevertheless, it was a bad look.
I didn't do it.
I would advise him. No, but
I didn't do it.
Martin, you're not a world leader, are you? You're a great journalist, and I have great respect for that. But you're not a world leader. I don't want to say everybody else. I mean other world leaders, not literally everybody. I mean, I don't do it. You don't do it. Most people don't do it. I know. Hang on. Do it.
I was elected as an MEP. I never took free suits. I never took freebies. I paid my own way. I paid for my own stuff. I did actually have some standards, believe it or not. So I do know a bit about this. What about you? Did you take bungs when you were in?
No, I didn't. But the point is, nobody offered me anything like that because I didn't need, as an MEP, great privilege though it was to represent the people. I wasn't going to international world summits with world leaders. I didn't have the same pressures, and there wasn't the same reason for it. I mean, Wahid Ali hasn't had anything in return for this.
How do you know? He got a pass. He was wandering around Downing Street. No, he wasn't elected.
The truth is that actually Wahid Ali should have a pass because he's been an absolutely integral part of the political Starmer project right from the beginning. He's a Labour.
Yeah, he paid his way in.
He didn't pay his way in. He's a working peer, a working politician, and he has been for decades in Labour. The truth is, in my view, he should have a pass, but actually they've quickly made him give it up because as you say, it's not a good look. And I do agree they've done things naively that have looked bad, and we shouldn't be talking about this. It is a waste of time and a silly story, and it is their fault. But
okay, so let's get on to that point, because, you know, and well done, by the way. You and I both follow the rules. We didn't take bungs, we didn't take free suits. Maybe the Prime Minister should have followed in our footsteps, as small as our footsteps were. As you say, we weren't the Prime Minister. Nevertheless,
let's just clarify that, though. Like, did anybody offer you thousands of pounds for free suits, which you bravely turned down, or was it in fact never going to happen? Wouldn't it be relevant?
All right, I was offered, mate. I was offered all sorts of lobby lunches and all sorts of lobby meetings. I never went on a single one of them. Single one of them, because I did not want to use my position to advance other people's jobs. My job was to get Britain out of the European Union, and I stuck to that job. Enough about me. Let's get back to the Labour Party. Right, that you must admit the Labour Party are having a nightmare. If this is a football match, they'd be trying to substitute Sir Keir Starmer and get the lad off the pitch. He's having a disaster. You know it. The press team aren't getting a handle on this. Every single day, you don't want to be talking about this. Now, the Labour Party don't want to be talking about this, yet we are. Day after day after day. The Labour Party, you must admit, they're having a nightmare.
If we're going to do football metaphors, I think their real problem actually is that I don't think they're quite sure where Keir Starmer fits in. He's certainly not the big number 9. I don't think he's the manager. I'm not sure if he's the owner or the chairman of the board or who he is, but I think that is part of the problem. It's not quite sure what his role is in his own government. I think he thought he was going to be more of the chairman of the board, but the way it's looking, they either need a manager or a new striker, or a bit of both, maybe.
Yeah, I think you're right there, but if they're not careful, mate, the electorate are going to start showing the red card. It'll all be over before it's even began. Sean Simon, fantastic sport. Thank you very much. I do enjoy our joust. You're a good lad. Thank you very much, Sean, for joining us on the show. Thank you. Now, moving on, Israel have hit the capital of Lebanon with an airstrike, killing at least 2 people after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his military will keep fighting with full force as he refuses to respond to calls for a ceasefire. And joining us now is Beirut-based journalist Gareth Brown. Gareth, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Can you show us an indication of what the mood is like on the ground? We're hearing over here there's a mass evacuation underway of British citizens. What's the mood on the ground and how tense is it?
Yeah, I think tense is the word, and I think things have really changed in the last week or two. You know, Beirut has this sort of reputation as a city that parties through the bad times. It's no stranger to war. There was a brutal civil war in the 80s here. You know, Israel and Hezbollah fought a war in 2006, and Beirut always sort of prided itself on being this open and fun city. But I think that's changed in the last week and a half. We've seen, you know, well over 100,000 people displaced from the south. Most of them are coming to Beirut seeking shelter. We've seen a wave of devastating airstrikes by Israel in the south, but also in other parts of the country, in the northeast and in parts of Beirut. And then we've seen, I think most importantly, this wave of assassinations, airstrikes on senior Hezbollah figures, predominantly in South Beirut, in the Dahia, which is this neighborhood where Hezbollah have a lot of strength and support. So yeah, it's tense, and I think we've gone from a sort of complacency to now there's an almost there's a feeling that things are going to get worse before they get better. What does that look like? What does that escalation look like? We don't know exactly, but we're not through the worst of it, certainly.
Okay, we've got some live pictures we can show you now on our screens, Gareth, and while the viewers take a look at them, can I ask you, what's the mood like amongst the British expats community there? We're being told that 700 troops are going to Cyprus to aid with the evacuation, but is there an appetite to get out of there? Is there an appetite to stick around and help? What's the consensus amongst the Brits there? And we can just see some live pictures there now from southern Lebanon, Gareth, on our screens of what appears to be substantial plumes of smoke going out. So I'm taking it there is still bombing or explosive activity. Gareth, are you anywhere near that? Can you hear that? Can you confirm that?
Well, you know, that's down in the south. We know that there's been bombing here in the capital in the last hour or two. You know, the Israelis claim to have taken out a senior figure in Hezbollah's aerial unit. You know, this sort of sound of distant airstrikes and Israeli jets screeching over over the city and breaking the sound barrier. It's become part of the city's soundscape. It's quite normal. We can occasionally hear it here from my apartment, but we don't feel particularly in danger. And on the idea of Brits, there's a lot of Brits here, and I don't think there is a consensus. Some have left, some are trying to get out, but you will meet a lot of people here who, Lebanon is a country which people become quite emotionally attached to. And I think a lot of people, they don't want to leave. They don't want to cut and run. They want to stay with the city during the bad times because they've seen it at its best and they know the heart of the city. So it's different for everyone, and it's hard to sort of pin down or say there's any sort of consensus. Some people have gone to Cyprus, but I think as the hours go by, as the days go by, it's getting harder and harder to leave. Most commercial airlines aren't flying out of the country anymore. So you've got really limited options if you want to fly out, and those are diminishing by the day. And then, of course, we have this big border here with Syria, and Syria is not a realistic escape route for many people because of the civil war there. So it depends who you speak to. Everyone's got a sort of different opinion, a different strategy for dealing with what looks like a situation that's going to get a lot worse in the coming days and weeks.
And Gareth, we saw some spectacular videos of bombs going off, and clearly there were armaments, explosives, arms caches, arsenals in buildings that the Israeli Defense Forces were specifically targeting. How much of a hazard is it to the civilian population of Lebanon with Hezbollah carrying out that kind of stashing of arsenal? We heard a lot of stories coming out of Gaza of similar things with Hamas. Is that a factor that's endangering perhaps the lives of civilians?
I think it's a factor. I mean, this is a characteristic of Hezbollah as an organization. It's very disciplined and very secretive. And, nobody really knows where these weapons are. Nobody really understands the true extent of their capability when it comes to, rockets and missiles. So that's sort of the great unknown. What I would say is that some civilians have certainly been killed. Many civilians have been killed in the last week in the bombardment. How much do these civilians know about where Hezbollah is stashing its weapons? How precise are these strikes? It sort of remains to be seen. But I think people are concerned about that, especially in the south. And I think that's why you saw a lot of people fleeing the south in the last few days. Well over 100,000 people. And South Lebanon it's a real bastion of strength for Hezbollah. For their weaponry, for their fighters, but they're also part of the community. They're part of the country, part of the society. It's very difficult to separate the two. But, for sure it's a risk. And, I think the Israelis so far have been quite successful in targeting certain arms caches, particularly in the northeast, in the south. And we see videos of secondary explosions. But I'm sure Hezbollah have a significant capability that we haven't seen yet, that hasn't been destroyed, that hasn't been touched by the Israeli air campaign yet. It's a great unknown, and frankly, anyone that says they have a really good understanding of, Hezbollah's weapon capabilities, where these weapons are they being hid in the heart of villages? It's very difficult to say that with any certainty. So I'm a bit skeptical.
Gareth Brown, that was an excellent, thank you, summary of life there in Lebanon. Please come on the show again and please stay safe in the meantime. Thank you very much for joining us from Beirut there. Gareth Brown, thank you. Now, well-behaved prisoners may go free early under Texas-style measures to cut overcrowding in British jails. I'll be speaking to a former advisor to Yvette Cooper, Danny Shaw, next. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
The king of breakfast TV is back. That's right, Britain's favourite TV host, Eamon Holmes, returns to Britain's hottest breakfast programme. Breakfast every day from 6 a.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11 only on GB News.
My next guest is a composer and film director whose musical journey began at the tender age of 4.5 when he started playing the piano. Under the tutelage of luminaries such as Sir George Benjamin and Sir Harrison Birtwistle, he has honed his craft, primarily grounding himself in the classical world. He's written music in sets of composition in the 24 major and minor keys of the chromatic scale, producing an album which is accompanied by 24 videos, and it's called 24. I'm joined now by Fabio D'Andrea. Fabio, great to see you. Tell me a little bit, I'm a layman when it comes to music, tell me a little bit about how a composer chooses a key and what it means to the composer to have chosen the key.
Sure. Well, I think every musical key, and there's 24 of them, major and minor, they have their own feel. So you could play a piece in, say, C major, which is normally regarded as the simple key, it's all the white notes on the piano. But if you play that piece, say, in A-flat major, it's going to have a very different feel. So I decided to create this project, 24 pieces, again, looking back at our traditions and the history of what composers have done in the past, especially in regards to piano music, and explore every key, see if I could bring out the emotion that you feel from that actual key itself.
Were you fonder of some than others? I imagine, for example, you're not so fond of C because it's too straightforward.
Actually, no, I love all of them. And that's the beauty of music. Every key has its own feel. And some keys are associated with different feelings. So, for example, C major has actually been historically associated with victory. It's quite a victorious feel about it. I love D-flat major. That's quite mellow. But every key has its own special feeling. And sometimes something will just sound different in that one key, and it's meant to be in that key. So for me, this has been a whole exploration of that.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:27. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Ministers are drawing up plans for Texas-style prison reforms that would enable inmates to earn points to reduce their time behind bars by taking part in workshops. Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, plans to visit the US state later this year to see how Britain can mirror its success in reducing its high prison population and rate of reoffending. Now, could Labour solve our overcrowded prison crisis in a similar manner? Well, I'm delighted to say I'm joined now by the former advisor to Yvette Cooper and the crime and policing commentator Danny Shaw. Danny, welcome to the show. I've got to say, Danny, I spent quite a bit of time in prisons giving speeches and talking to inmates. I think this idea has a lot of merit. I've seen with my own eyes, if you give inmates purpose, if you give them something to focus on, it can be transformational. Tell us why you think it's a good idea.
Well, it's just an idea at the moment that the Ministry of Justice may be looking at in the future. So let's not get ahead of ourselves that it's suddenly going to be adopted. But I think it does have some potential. Clearly, it's a good thing to encourage prisoners to engage constructively while they're in jail. Not to get involved in trouble while they're in prison. To steer clear of drugs, steer clear of fights, and to try and undertake courses that can help with their rehabilitation. So anything that can encourage them to do that is good. At the moment, there are incentives for them to do that. They might get some various privileges in jail. The idea of giving them sort of time off their sentence, however, I think would have to be very, very carefully managed, because what you don't want is someone who's convicted of a really serious crime being seen to be treated more leniently because they've played it by the book in jail when they are in fact still a risk. So this cannot be a substitute for risk assessment, for releasing someone without ensuring that they're safe to be free. So very, very careful, I think, but it does have some potential.
But it's worth pointing out at the moment the Labour Party is having a bit of a nightmare with early releases. We've seen yesterday evening 37 prisoners wrongly released by mistake, 5 still at large. And of course, there is a huge pressure to kind of get these inmates out early because the prisons are bursting at the seams. So, for starters, the Labour Party could do with a good news story about prisons. And secondly, Danny, it would make absolute sense, would it not, to try and get anybody who's going back to Civvy Street, as it were, to be going out with a more rounded, rehabilitated and perhaps skill-based set of initiatives to take to the streets.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think firstly, I think it's true to say that the prisoner releases programme has been very badly handled from an operational point of view. Not only if you've got 37 prisoners released in error, 5 still at large, you've had prisoners who should have been placed on electronic tags who haven't been tagged, so I believe that number could be in the hundreds. You've had prisoners released without the victims being informed in domestic abuse cases. You've even had someone who was convicted of manslaughter who's been released early. So all in all, operationally, it's been a bit of a fiasco, and there's another big crunch of releases to come in October. But this should be seen quite separately from a scheme to encourage inmates to behave well in prison, which is a kind of longer-term potential solution to the problem of overcrowding. Look, you can't put something in place simply to try and reduce space in itself. It's got to be a scheme that has merits in its own right. In Texas, clearly, it made a massive impact in terms of reducing the number of people in prison. And it's also, it appears, may have contributed to a reduction in crime. So, you know, it can't just be put in place as a quick fix to keep the numbers down.
Fantastic. So really, really fascinating. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. That's Danny Shaw, the former advisor to Yvette Cooper and a crime and policing commentator. Please come back on the show. Great guest. Thank you very much. There's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock, including on yesterday's show, Sir Keir Starmer admitted to us that his Homes for Heroes plan would not prioritise British veterans over asylum seekers. Soon I'll be speaking to a former squattee who himself became homeless and suicidal for his reaction to what he deems to be the final betrayal. But first, it's time for your news headlines, and here's Mark White.
It's 4:32, the very latest headlines from the GB News Centre. Scotland Yard has issued a call for any potential victims of Mohammed Al-Fayed to come forward. 5 women have claimed they were raped by the former Harrods owner, who died last year at the age of 94. A number of others say they were sexually assaulted by him. The current managing director of Harrods has apologised and said the business failed colleagues. Michael Ward, who worked for Mohammed Al-Fayed for 4 years, said he was not aware of his criminality and abuse, but described it as a shameful period in Harrods' history. Israeli forces have carried out airstrikes in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, today. Well, you're now looking at live images of southern Lebanon as more rockets have been fired from the south of Lebanon into northern Israel, taken out by Israel's Iron Dome. Dusk just beginning to fall on southern Lebanon at the moment. There has been intense cross-border fighting throughout the day. Well, security sources have said that the strike on Beirut targeted and killed a senior Hezbollah commander. It comes as the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, told his military to keep fighting with full force in Lebanon. The Lebanese Health Ministry claims dozens have been killed so far in today's strikes. The family of a teenager who was murdered in Wolverhampton have told a court they're devastated, totally heartbroken and confused. 2 12-year-old boys found guilty of murdering Sean Sisahai in a random machete attack are being sentenced this week. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a fractured skull in November last year. They're believed to be the youngest defendants convicted of murder in Britain since Robert Thompson and John Venables, both aged 11, were found guilty of killing 2-year-old James Bulger in 1993. British and US and Australian defence ministers are meeting in London to discuss ambitious plans to build the next generation of attack submarines. John Healey hosted US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin and Australia's Defence Minister Richard Marles as the Tri-Nation Initiative takes the next step towards building the submarines. The Ministry of Defence says the deal to build nuclear-powered but conventionally armed attack submarines would help support more than 20,000 jobs in the UK alone. Finally, the Hollywood icon Dame Joan Collins has taken a swipe at extreme political correctness. Speaking to GB News presenter Andrew Pearce, she said she was definitely not a fan of woke culture.
Consider myself to be feminine and a feminist, and why should we be called female actors? I find it demeaning. I think it's gone out of control. Really, you can't say anything, people get offended. We've lost our British sense of humour.
Well, our very own antidote to woke culture, Martin Daubney, will be with you just after the break.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Yet more rain to come for many of us during the rest of the day and overnight. Very heavy in some places and at a risk of flooding, particularly for those areas that were flooded earlier in the week. And that's because this front, which has been bringing persistent rain to Northern Ireland and Northern England through the day, moves south during the evening and merges with an area of intense thundery downpours across Wales and central England. And as that happens, in just a few hours, we could see 40 to 60 millimetres of additional rain on top of what we saw last weekend and the start of this week. So an amber warning enforced, risk of localised flooding, risk of transport disruption as we begin the day on Friday. Now, by dawn, the wettest conditions will be moving south, so affecting Kent, Sussex, perhaps parts of Hampshire, as well as heavy showers move in from the Channel. It does begin to dry up elsewhere and clearer skies coming through across Wales, Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. A cold start to the day here under those clear skies. A few showers for northern Scotland, but in between there will be bright skies, and we keep that cold wind in Scotland, but during the morning it extends further south. And it does help to clear the rain, so we say farewell to that by mid to late morning. But, well, it's going to feel chilly as that northerly wind sets in. There'll be further showers carried through on that wind, predominantly across northern and western coast, but a few popping up inland as well. Temperatures of 14 or 15 Celsius, though, not feeling particularly warm at all. And then into the evening, the showers inland tend to ease away, lengthy clear spells developing away from northern and western coast where those showers will carry on. And where we've got the clear skies inland, of course, temperatures will drop. A touch of ground frost possible first thing this weekend, so a chilly start, but a fine day for many on Saturday before more wind and rain arrives from the west on Sunday.
The latest GB News travel.
I'm Jules Buckley. Good afternoon. Still some queues southbound for the M618 Middlewich to 17. A breakdown, the lane closed and slow. All the traffic on the southbound M40 being held. Junction 4 down to Loudwater at 3. Traffic at a stand at the scene of a collision. Pretty much the same story in Swansea in South Wales. Eastbound M4 part block for a bump. 45 to Llansamn at 44. Now both sides of the M25 are still closed from Sevenoaks at 5 to Godstone at 6. Big queues either side of the scene of a collision. That means the London-bound M26 is closed from Junction 3 up towards the M25 at 5 and queuing. And also the M26 in Kent coastbound is shut from the M25 at 5 to Rotherham at 2A and queuing. And that's also due to a collision there this afternoon causing queues. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:39. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, Meghan and Harry are seeking to squash claims from former staff that the Duchess was a demonic boss who even had psycho moments. Sounds very dramatic, doesn't it? Now, this follows similar allegations from other former staff members that the former Suits actress was like a dictator in high heels who reduced grown men to tears. Very melodramatic, isn't it? Joining us now is the former Royal Gardener, Jack Stooks. Jack, always an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. So, of course, the rumours are being denied, but they're rather eyebrow-raising rumours, aren't they?
They are quite. As normally they do tend to be coming from anything that the Sussexes do or say. I think the problem is what we've seen sort of hearsay, but there's no actual evidence or documented evidence that we've seen as of yet. So I think that the problem is it's all jolly well and good us talking about it and saying how nasty this person is and what a dictator she is, but without backing it up with evidence. It seems that there's a lot of noise, but there's no backing up to the claims. Personally, I didn't know Meghan, but I knew Harry very well, and without doubt, Harry was never that way. So I don't see why suddenly Harry would change and allow his staff to be mistreated in such an appalling way as what we're hearing. I know that other staff members have said the complete opposite, saying how fantastic she is, how she actually gives them gifts, how she sort of, if they've got excess, for instance, eggs in the garden, it's like, oh, take some eggs home with you. Probably they've had some of the jam that I think everybody in the country have been sort of trying to get hold of, the famous strawberry jam. So it is a difficult one, you know. I think there's a lot of I want to say hate. I know that's quite a strong word, but it's sort of like this sort of smear campaign against the Sussexes, and I don't know. I think it's time to sort of just live and let live and allow them to just be, unless of course these claims are found to be accurate and backed up. But otherwise, yeah, let's just see what the next few days bring.
Of course, Jack, some people might rather like the idea of a dictator in high heels reducing grown men to tears. I digress. But I guess the point is now the Sussex's media team are having to go into kind of damage limitation mode. They're briefing to the press themselves. Even if these things aren't true, they're having to brief against it, dismissing the allegations, saying it's from former staff who are embittered. It just seems, doesn't it, that the constant headlines that come out feel to be very negative.
I think this is the problem, is whenever the Sussexes do or say anything, there's negativity that follows within the press, and that is the problem that I've seen for long enough. And when I worked for the royal family, and I knew Harry, and I knew William, and I knew the whole family, it was very difficult to see and to watch, because he's a very different person to what you're hearing and all the negative press that we do hear on a day-to-day basis. And yet again, here we are talking supposedly negatively. I don't want to talk negatively about Meghan. I don't personally know her. I know people have very strong opinions, and of course they're entitled to their opinions, because that is their own opinions. But I do feel that the press have sort of carried this hatred on, and this sort of campaign of let's see what we can say next about what Meghan and Harry have done wrong, rather than what they've done right. And we all know full well that you choose anybody in your life and you decide, I want to hate this person, all you will find is hate, because that's all you're looking for. And that's all the press seems to be looking for in that family. And I think that let's try and, you know, let go a little and give back some of the good, and actually find the good in them, find what they do that's actually good and positive, and try and get that into the press, rather than one line hatred every single day.
Thank you very much, Jack Stooks. The milk of human kindness there floweth over from you. Thank you for joining us. Now, I'm also joined by Cameron Walker, GBNews' royal correspondent in the studio. I know you are itching to get your thoughts across on this story here?
Yeah, as Jack was alluding to there, there's clearly two sides to this story. I've been told by a source very close to Meghan that actually the people alleging that she's this dictator marching around in high heels has to be false. The reason being all her staff are based in an office in Los Angeles and Hollywood, whereas Meghan and Harry are based at their home in Montecito. So it's not possible for them to be marching around in high heels. Having said that, there are 18 staff members who have left the Sussexes' employment since they married in 2018, and there have been a number of former staff members who have spoken to A, The Times, and B, a internal Buckingham Palace investigation when Harry and Meghan were still working members of the royal family. And though that investigation conclusion is still not public.
OK, thank you very much, Cameron Walker. Excellent stuff as ever. Now, on yesterday's show, Keir Starmer admitted to us that his Homes for Heroes plan would not prioritise British veterans over asylum seekers. I'll be speaking to a former squaddie soon for his reactions on the final betrayal. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
True crime is everywhere.
Yeah, next weekend, CrimeCon UK takes place in London. And joining us now to tell us more about that event and the true crime phenomena is former detective Stephen. How do you pronounce your surname? Keogh. Sorry, Stephen.
That's all right.
I should have texted you before. And Nancy, and again, Nancy, what's your surname?
Bourne.
Thank you. I'm showing my ignorance there, but thank you both for joining us. So, Stephen, you're a former top cop. Hope you don't mind me describing you as that. At CrimeCon and other events like that, do you get into sort of the semantics of the investigations and, you know, how... For example, how I was watching something the other night where somebody was unfortunately murdered, but you saw the crime scene investigators trying to work out from which side the person was attacked from. Did the knife come from the left-hand side or the right-hand side? Is it all that kind of stuff?
So for me, everything I've done since I've left the police is about sharing that knowledge of investigations, because if you watch TV, they get it wrong a lot. So what we try and do, I'm not the only police officer there, there's experts, so forensic scientists, psychologists, all from that investigative world, just trying to get across, well, actually, this is how it's really done. This is what we do, not what you're going to see on telly. And I think that's really important. So for me personally, coming along to CrimeCon, I just look at the list of people that are there, honestly, and I'm proud to be associated with them. There are some fascinating people there. People who've really fought for justice for their children. People who are campaigning for victims, for survivors. So it's an event that when you look at the name, you might think, oh, they're just going to sit there talking about serial killers and what they got up to. Couldn't be further from the truth. It's really about what goes on, how it impacts the victims, how the investigations are carried out. It's educational as much as anything.
GB News, the People's Channel.
The Britain I grew up was the most peaceful, gentle society that has ever existed. That has been destroyed.
Opinion polls show immigration is the #1 concern to the British public. Are you proud to be British?
Yeah, I'm ever so proud.
My name is Stephen Edgington, and in this documentary, I want to find out how Britain became a nation of immigrants. Immigration, the truth, available at gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:48. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, Keir Starmer told GB News yesterday that he cannot guarantee that veterans will be placed ahead of other groups in housing waiting lists, including even asylum seekers. Well, joining me now is Jamie Micklefield, a Royal Artillery veteran. Jamie, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Jamie, I understand that after your time of service, you found yourself getting into a bit of a pickle. Before we talk about Sir Keir Starmer's Homes for Heroes initiative and what you make of that, could you tell us, would you mind sharing your story with us?
Well, yeah, I mean, I left the military and I had nowhere to live, so
I ended up in Mike Jackson House in Aldershot, which is like supported housing until I found somewhere else to live. They did have caseworkers and that there, but for me, I needed to do it all myself. So,
and how difficult did you find it making that transition, Jane? We hear so often, the camaraderie you have in your regiment. You're surrounded by support. You got the banter. You got the day-to-day engagement, and then you find yourself back out on Civvy Street being dumped out there. I mean, were you given any help, and how overwhelming did you find all of that?
It's very tough, really, because you've got it's the big wide world. Effectively, it's like what you just mentioned there. Is you're in the military. I'm ex-Royal Dragoon Guards, Royal Armoured Corps, and I had a great lot of people around me. But when you leave, you're left to do all this yourself. And housing is a big shock to some people, because when you're used to getting fed, watered, you've got accommodation, etc. You've got all these bills to pay when you come out into reality. You've got council tax, rent, all these bills, as we all know, which is not cheap these days as well. But it's very tough, and you've really got to clamp down on it. Really, I found it very, very difficult to transition, especially when you're wondering what's next.
Of course. And so could I ask you now, Jamie, for your reaction to Homes for Heroes, to Keir Starmer, when he announced that? We all thought, great, at last, this is precisely the kind of thing that veterans need, that the country needs. At last, there's some sense of priority being given to veterans' needs. And yet, when we asked the Prime Minister, Jamie, face-to-face yesterday, it turns out it's not the case after all. Veterans won't be at the front of the queue. They could even be behind the queue, behind asylum seekers. Jamie, having served your country and been prepared to die for your country, how does that make you feel?
Well, it's not nice. It's not nice to her. We do the job. We'll go away. We'll leave our families. Some of us don't come back. Some of us don't come back like we went. We're broken, some of us. So, it's not nice.
What would you like to see done instead? I mean, what would you like to see offered to people like you? I mean, I found out from a former SAS veteran earlier, I couldn't believe my ears, that former veterans can't claim benefits if they're homeless. Now, I get it. You don't have a fixed address, but surely there needs to be some kind of initiative specifically giving veterans who are homeless just an address they can apply to get benefits, to get help, to get on their feet, to get started again. It seems astonishing that that isn't in place, Jamie.
Yeah, it's terrible, really. I mean, these guys need to eat effectively and live. I mean, if you're not getting any money, then that's really terrible. I mean, it's... I don't know what to say. I mean, without kind of swearing, it's bad. We need to look after our veterans, a lot better. We need to be recognised. We need the support. We don't need it next year. We need it now.
Jamie, none of us want you to swear on TV, mostly my bosses, so let's not do that. But could I ask you, just quickly, how are you doing, mate? How are you?
Well, I'm all right. I do suffer PTSD. I feel a bit nervous now, to be honest, but I'm going through a rocky road, to be honest. So, I'm going through a bit of a rocky road at the minute. So, I'm getting treatment, but we'll push on with that. But other than that, I've got my mates, as you know, people. So I don't want to get emotional. Sorry.
No, you've got every right to feel emotional, especially under these circumstances. Look, Jamie, I know it's been difficult for you to come on TV and talk about it today. I can see you're emotional. Mate, I just wish you the very, very best of British. Thanks for your service. And let's stay in touch. Jamie Mickerfield, top man, top lad. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, God. What can you say? Let's move on. Now, Keir Starmer, sorry. These people deserve better. They really, really deserve better than this. They really, really do. And we've got to make sure we get them the help they need on this channel. We've got to do more. Thank you, Jamie. You're back there, mate. We're going to do all we can to try and help people like you. Starting right now. Now, don't go anywhere because it's fresh blow for Keir Starmer under increasing fire over endless allegations. He's the Prime Minister of hypocrisy. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Yet more rain to come for many of us during the rest of the day and overnight. Very heavy in some places and at a risk of flooding, particularly for those areas that were flooded earlier in the week. And that's because this front, which has been bringing persistent rain to Northern Ireland and Northern England through the day, moves south during the evening and merges with an area of intense thundery downpours across Wales and central England. And as that happens, in just a few hours, we could see 40 to 60 millimetres of additional rain on top of what we saw last weekend and the start of this week. So an amber warning in force, risk of localised flooding, risk of transport disruption as we begin the day on Friday. Now, by dawn, the wettest conditions will be moving south, so affecting Kent, Sussex, perhaps parts of Hampshire, as well as heavy showers move in from the Channel. It does begin to dry up elsewhere and clearer skies coming through across Wales, Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. A cold start to the day here under those clear skies. A few showers for northern Scotland, but in between there will be bright skies, and we keep that cold wind in Scotland, but during the morning it extends further south. And it does help to clear the rain, so we say farewell to that by mid to late morning. But, well, it's going to feel chilly as that northerly wind sets in. There'll be further showers carried through on that wind, predominantly across northern and western coast, but a few popping up inland as well. Temperatures of 14 or 15 Celsius, though, not feeling particularly warm at all. And then into the evening, the showers inland tend to ease away. Lengthy clear spells developing away from northern and western coast where those showers will carry on. And where we've got the clear skies inland, of course, temperatures will drop. A touch of ground frost possible first thing this weekend. So a chilly start, but a fine day for many on Saturday before more wind and rain arrives from the west on Sunday.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
I'm Jules Buckley. Good afternoon. Glasgow, the westbound side of the M8 to the Kingston Bridge, very slow going. A lane shut for a collision there. There's a breakdown still causing big queues southbound M6. A lane shut Middlewich 18 to Crewe at 17. Swansea, South Wales, eastbound M4, very slow going. A lane shut 45 to 44 Llansamlet. That's due to a collision. The queue back towards 46 at Llangefellach. Southbound M40, junction 4 to 3 at Loudwater. Blocked traffic at a stand at the scene of a collision. Still big issues for the clockwise M25. Still closed Sevenoaks at 5 to Godstone at 6, queuing back to Orpington at 4. Slow anti-clock 2 for investigation work. And the London-bound M26 closed for a bump. No way through from junction 3 to the M25 at junction 5.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Desning, and good luck.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show. We're here on GB News and we're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK.
Wearing masks,
and working from home if we can really will help prevent infection.
Well, it's another day and another nightmare for Keir Starmer, this time under fresh fire for faking Lord Ali's £18 million mansion was his lockdown workplace. With his backbenchers and even supportive media turning on the Prime Minister, is this the final blow for Starmer's credibility, the Prime Minister of hypocrisy? And on yesterday's show, Sir Keir Starmer admitted to us that his Homes for Heroes plan would not prioritise British veterans over asylum seekers. And as Keir Starmer once again jets off to New York, a new report shows the globe-trotting PM will rack up an astonishing 65,000 air miles on official business before the year's out. What will Ed Miliband have to say about Jet Set Starmer's planet-sized carbon footprint? And a diversity drive to ensure 50% of candidates for the Welsh Parliament are women has been rejected. And that caused the Social Justice Minister to go into a bizarre rant about white men. We'll have that astonishing video because, trust me, they're not at all happy in the valleys. Well, to show thank you for your company. A very emotional interview we did before the end of the hour with a former serviceman who isn't getting the help he feels he needs. I've had loads and loads and loads of supportive your says and emails and tweets. Thank you very, very much. It was very emotional for both of us, and I think it's just a state we're in this country that we're just simply not doing enough to help people who've served in our armed forces when they're back on civic streets, and we have to do more. And I pledge my support to try and get more of that on this show and more for people watching. Thank you for sending your views, and if you want to get involved, please do so. GBNews.com/your say. But now's your headlines, and here's Mark White.
Good afternoon. At 5:02, the latest headlines from the GB News Centre. Scotland Yard has issued a call for any potential victims of Mohammed al-Fayed to come forward. 5 women have claimed they were raped by the former Harrods owner who died last year at the age of 94. A number of others say they were sexually assaulted by him. The current managing director of Harrods has apologised and said the business failed colleagues. Michael Ward, who worked for Mohammed al-Fayed for 4 years, said he was not aware of his criminality and abuse, but described it as a shameful period in Harrods' history. Israeli forces have carried out airstrikes in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, today. In southern Lebanon, there has been intense cross-border fighting. Security sources said that the strike on Beirut targeted and killed a senior Hezbollah commander. It comes as the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his military to keep fighting with the full force in Lebanon. The Lebanese Health Ministry claims dozens have been killed so far in today's strikes. Well, the former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, believes that despite the intense fighting, a ceasefire could be imminent.
I think it will happen in the next 72 hours. It takes some time. This is a very complex operation to get the scale of troop numbers that are required, although I'm sure the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, would have been preparing for this for some time.
The family of a teenager who was murdered in Wolverhampton have told a court they're devastated, totally heartbroken and confused. 2 12-year-old boys found guilty of murdering Sean Sisahai in a random machete attack are being sentenced this week. From Nottingham Crown Court, our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has the latest.
In the beginning of a 2-day sentencing here in Nottingham, the 2 boys who are now aged 13 years old heard how the machete killing that made them the UK's youngest knife murderers affected their victim Sean Sisahai's family. The family, in a statement read out in court today, said losing a child is a parent's worst nightmare. The family is devastated and totally heartbroken. They described Sean as confident and always honest, a brave soul. Mrs. Justice Tipples will hand down her sentence tomorrow to the 2 teenagers whose identities remain anonymous.
Will Hollis there. British, US and Australian defence ministers are meeting in London to discuss ambitious plans to build the next generation of attack submarines. John Healey hosted US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin and Australia's Defence Minister Richard Marles as the Tri-Nation Initiative takes the next step towards building the submarines. The Ministry of Defence says the deal to build nuclear-powered but conventionally armed attack submarines would help support more than 21,000 jobs in the UK alone. Well, the UK Defence Secretary said the partnership was vital in an increasingly volatile world.
We have held these discussions under a cloud of growing global insecurity. So in our trilateral and in our bilateral meetings, we've reinforced the need to stand together against Russian aggression, towards peace in the Middle East, and steadfast behind Ukraine for as long as it takes.
The Hollywood icon Dame Joan Collins has taken a swipe at extreme political correctness. Speaking to GB News presenter Andrew Pearce, she said she was definitely not a fan of woke culture.
Consider myself to be feminine and a feminist, and why should we be called female actors? I find it demeaning. I think it's gone out of control. Really, you can't say anything, people get offended. We've lost our British sense of humour.
And finally, astronomers have unveiled the most detailed map ever seen of our galaxy, from the violent births of newborn stars to the hidden mysteries of the galactic core. These new images show the Milky Way as you've never seen it before. The map is a culmination of more than 13 years of observations. Astronomers used infrared light from the European Southern Observatory to peer through the dust and gas which normally hides the centre of the galaxy. You know I'm not going to resist this. You don't need a telescope to find this particular star. It's Martin Daubney.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Mark Wyatt, an interstellar performance there. Thank you very much. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is facing questions over why he failed to declare repeatedly using a donor's £18 million penthouse for his political purposes. He used Lord Ali's property, now being called Ali's Palace, to film a message calling for more people to work from home when COVID guidelines were still in place. But was he really following the rules himself? Let's take a look at that now infamous video.
The new variant Omicron is spreading fast, and the argument that we don't know enough about it doesn't stack up. We may not be certain how dangerous it is, but we do know that lives are at risk. At times like this, we must all put the national interest first and play by the rules. Getting jabbed, wearing masks, and working from home if we can really will help prevent infections.
It's the picture of the kids on the bookshelf that gets me. Now, the Prime Minister is in the US at the moment, as he's meant to be speaking at the United Nations later. But this freebie scandal, once again, is surely overshadowing proceedings. And we can now speak with GB News' political editor, Chris Hope, live from the Big Apple. Chris, welcome to the show. So, Sir Keir Starmer is on important business in New York at the United Nations, but nobody this side of the pond is talking about that at all, Chris. Once again, overshadowing everything is Ali's Palace, the £18 million penthouse being used for what now looks like a bogus lockdown video. This scandal won't go away. What's the mood on the ground in New York?
Hi Martin, well of course as you might expect it's UN General Assembly week in New York. The place is in lockdown as diplomats are here, world leaders are here. We're here, Sir Keir Starmer will be briefing and talking to the UN General Assembly about 10:15 our time, UK time, so that'll be on GB News later. front and centre is the battle in Ukraine, the West trying to find a way of support President Zelensky. He's in the White House today meeting with Joe Biden. Kamala Harris is there. Donald Trump is in New York. He's got a press conference later on this afternoon and tonight, and I'm going to that for GB News. I'll try and shout a question for you, Martin. Tell me what it is in a second. And the big issue for Keir Starmer, apart from Ukraine, is dealing with the issues in Lebanon, getting Britons out of Lebanon to Cyprus. There's 2 UK warships in the area now. Immediately leave is the instruction from the UK. So Keir Starmer is going to be visiting the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. He earlier held a business roundtable trying to get investment in the UK. The big pressure that the government wants to get is some more money coming to the UK to help the economy grow, and that's why he held the roundtable earlier. But there's no question that the issue of freebies is a problem for him, for the domestic audience in the UK. It's not really clear why he had to have the photographs arranged behind him in Lord Ali's flat. We're told he used the flat because he didn't want to use his home address, because his home address is where he wants to maintain some privacy, or some degree of privacy for them, and that's not easy. So it's a real problem for him. We'll be asking him for GB News about that when we do see him. It's difficult and hard to explain, I think.
Yeah, well, my question for him, Chris, if you'd like to ask it, if you can shout it across, is Boris Johnson was forced to resign over breaking rules during COVID and endless allegations about wallpaper and taking bungs and cronyism. Now Sir Keir Starmer is faced with the same allegations. Will he do the right thing and resign? How do you reckon that'll go down?
Yeah, well, certainly no question. Sir Keir Starmer made a huge virtue of his own personal standards when he was attacking Boris Johnson for Partygate, Wallpapergate, and so it went on. That's why these questions are legitimate. It seems very clear to me that Sir Keir Starmer is going to carry on taking freebies when he wants to. He's going to have to go to trips to football and whatever it might be. He sees that as a way of drumming up business for the UK. Although he is making clear that with his taking in more personal freebies, that's an issue. Earlier, I did interview him yesterday, Martin. I do think in the news today we're seeing the Scotland Yard asking for any women to come forward about the Mohammed Al Fayed scandal. Sir Keir Starmer was the DPP in 2008, around the time when the CPS chose not to prosecute or take any action over claims of sexual assault against a 15-year-old girl. And I asked him about that question in an interview last night. It's worth seeing what he had to say.
Just finally, looking at your record as Director of Public Prosecutions, Mohammed Al Fayed was not prosecuted for sexual assault against a 15-year-old woman when you were DPP. Have you reflected on that? Do you want to apologise to the victim? You were head of the prosecutorial service at the time.
Well, I've not. That particular case didn't come across my desk. It was dealt with by senior lawyers within the Crown Prosecution Service, and I don't think I certainly haven't had access to the file again. I'm not sure you have. So, you know.
But an apology from the CPS?
Well, look, having not had access to the file myself or yourself, then you know, we're not in that place.
So, no apology there from Sir Keir Starmer when the CPS has admitted it twice had a chance to prosecute Fayed when he was alive, and they didn't. One to watch, Martin.
An excellent question there to the Prime Minister from you there, Chris Hope, and thank you once again for asking the Prime Minister about the Homes for Heroes situation. We've been carrying on that conversation here today, speaking to veterans. Thank you so much, Chris Hope, for holding power to account. Now go and get your fangs stuck into the Big Apple. Now, for the latest on the Mohammed Al Fayed allegations, I'm joined in the studio by GB News correspondent Cameron Walker. Cameron's fascinating insight there. Of course, Sir Keir Starmer was the chief of the CPS at the time. Questions being asked about how, when he was alive, Mr Al Fayed managed to evade the justice. And what's the latest development on this story today?
Yeah, and as you say, Chris Hope spoke to the Prime Minister there on this very issue. The Crown Prosecution Service failed to prosecute Mohammed Al Fayed when he was alive twice during during his lifetime, once in 2008 over an alleged rape of a 15-year-old girl, and another time a couple of years later for an alleged indecent assault. And what's happened today is the Metropolitan Police has come out with a statement asking any other victims who have not yet come forward, please do so. That is what the police are saying. They're saying that specially trained officers will be there to support you, those trained to deal with victims and survivors of sexual abuse. They also say that the police have now been in contact with the lawyers of those who have already bravely come forward, those survivors who took part in the BBC documentary and those who subsequently have come forward. And they also said, because, of course, Fayed is dead and now cannot be criminally liable, they're looking at his associates and whether they had a part to play, and to see if there are any potential criminal allegations that they could be liable for. Commander Stephen Clayman saying it is vital that any victim has a voice and know that the allegations are taken seriously. The current Harrods director has released a statement today, whose name is Michael Ward. He's saying that Harrods failed our colleagues following sexual misconduct allegations. He also said that Mr. Fayed presided over a toxic culture of secrecy, intimidation, fear of repercussion and sexual misconduct. And Mr. Ward actually worked for Mr. Fayed for 4 years, and he's also addressed that. And he said he was not aware of Fayed's criminality and abuse, and described it as a shameful period in the business's history. The General Medical Council, the list goes on, Martin, they've also released a statement confirming that they are investigating two private doctors worked for Mr. Fayed around the time of these allegations, who allegedly carried out intrusive and inappropriate STI tests against these victims. So although Fayed is dead, it looks like a number of other individuals could have questions to answer.
And Cameron, in that chair where you are on Friday, we were joined by Gloria Allred. She's the attorney representing some of these survivors. She also, of course, famously represented some of Harvey Weinstein's victims. It was astonishing what she was telling us, what had been going on. And you were at that press conference. Some of the allegations that Mr. Al-Fayed was using Harrods as a place to locate children, sometimes 14-year-olds, sending out members of staff to get women and girls from the shop floor of Harrods to bring them to him, and then going on the allegations to even commit crimes on that location itself. It's an incredible case, and one where there's a huge appetite for justice.
Yeah, I was sat in that press conference for over an hour, Martin, and a number of the victims and survivors were in the room, and it was just so fascinating to see their bravery, I think. And also, what was also quite shocking is Mohammed Al-Fayed, he seemed to have a type. A number of them were blonde, all of them were beautiful. And it was just really interesting to see them starting to get some level of justice. A number of lawyers sat on the panel talking to us as journalists, and they made the point that although Harrods, the civil case they're bringing against Harrods is a start, they did allude to the fact that this is certainly not the beginning of the end. There are several avenues of legal action they could potentially go down, notably Harrods, but also the CPS, as they said, failed, 2 times they failed to prosecute Mr. Fayed when he was alive, and a number of other individuals who have not yet been publicly identified.
Thank you very much, Cameron Walker. Excellent summary there. Thank you for joining us. Now, moving on, because members of the Senedd have rejected diversity plans to make sure that the Welsh Parliament balance has a 50-50 split of men and women. Now, Welsh Labour's Social Justice Minister, Jane Hutt, didn't react too well.
Are Senedd members here interested in what this expanded Senedd looks like in 2026? Do you want to come back to a Senedd full of white men? No.
Dear, oh dear, Miss Hutt is not remotely HP about that. So, should there be less white men in the Welsh Parliament? Joining us now is the Welsh Reform UK Councillor David Thomas. David, welcome to the show. What on earth is going on in Wales? Can it even be possible to legislate against white men?
Well, this is absolutely crazy. And how this is not like front page news. This is clearly a racist comment made by a Senedd minister, Labour minister, and I'm just dumbfounded how this is not everywhere. How could she get up and say that in front of all those Senedd members and nothing is mentioned? I've read 2 articles now, one by Nation Cymru and one by our friends at the BBC. They tell us that the bill has been scrapped. They mentioned Jane in a number of comments, but not once did they mention the racist comment that she made when she stood up in the Senate and said about white men.
Now, David, it's worth pointing out, of course, that Humza Yousaf had his little rant, didn't he, about everyone being white. You know, the men white, and he was lambasted for it for some time to come. But as you say, Ms. Hurt isn't getting much stick. But it's ridiculous, is it not, that surely the electorate don't care about what's in somebody's trousers. They would care about what's between their ears, the best person for the job, irrespective of gender. And the fact of the matter is, this Miss Hurt seems to be in charge of these policies, a social justice minister. What on earth is a social justice minister? Why do we need one?
Well, look, it should be our voters, shouldn't it? Not the political elites that choose our Senate members. And I'm not even sure why this bill was even created in the first place anyway. It's pretty much a 50-50 split within the Senate anyway. But again, the major issue here for me is the fact that this is a racist comment and it has gone nowhere. Can you imagine, Martin, if any white man stood up in the Senate and said, come on now, you need to read my guidance, because if you don't, then you're going to come back to an expanded Senate full of white women. Can you imagine what would happen to a white man if he stood up and said that in our Welsh Parliament? It's just crazy. Why is this not front page news?
Well, we're talking about it, and that's because, you know, we're one of the few media outlets that talks common sense on these matters. And I'll put it to you again, people don't give a monkeys about people's gender. They don't care about any of that in the real world. They care about competence. They care about ability. That's what people really care about. But it seems, though, that once again, this woke mindset seems to have captured the inner sanctum of the Welsh Parliament. The fact of the matter is, though, common sense did prevail, David Thomas. This got booted out. It was voted down.
Exactly. But the irony of it as well, which makes me laugh, is the bill is to promote inclusive, diverse. Yet the minister is marginalising white men. It beggars belief, and it's just outrageous how Miss Hutt is not being made accountable for this racist comment.
OK, well, we're holding her accountable now. David Thomas, I'm assuming you're a white man. I don't want to kind of, get things wrong here and, misgender you, misrace you. But if you are a white man, Councillor David Thomas, then you've lived to fight again another day, and so have I. Thank you very much for joining us. Always an absolute pleasure. You take care there, my friend. Cheers. Now, howdy, because well-behaved prisoners may go free under, segue there, may go free early under Texas-style measures to cut overcrowding. Who wrote that script? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Princess of Wales, albeit behind closed doors, is back chairing meetings, doing what she cares so very deeply about, which is early years.
Good morning, Isabel. Good morning, Ben. Good news indeed. A slow, but we hope steady and sure recovery. It was last December that the Princess did anything like this. As you say, it was a low-key meeting with members of her own staff and a representative from the Centre for Early Learning, Early Childhood. She is committed, she's vowed to support this charity throughout her life. It's her project in many ways, and she's doing that. So another good sign, she probably will be at the Remembrance Sunday ceremonial at the Cenotaph in November, and we can look out for hearing about and perhaps even seeing other small events, because the palace said that it would be a slow return. light duties, if you will. But she's back, and after that wonderful video last week, it's something to be applauded. And she goes with our best wishes, of course.
Prince William, of course, has been working quite courageously whilst his father and wife have been struggling with their health woes. He was at the SAS base yesterday in Hereford. What was he doing there?
Well, we won't know very much because they never, ever talk about what they do. The SAS keep their secrets very close to their battle dress. But he went down there. He's been before. Obviously, they'll be briefing him about recent work they've been doing. And their preparations for doing, well, usually the unexpected. The SAS never know when they're going to be called upon to do the impossible tasks that they carry out with such vigour and courage.
GB News, the People's Channel.
The Britain I grew up was the most peaceful, gentle society that has ever existed. That has been destroyed.
Opinion polls show immigration is the #1 concern to the British public. Are you proud to be British?
Yeah, I'm ever so proud.
My name is Stephen Edgington, and in this documentary, I want to find out how Britain became a nation of immigrants. Immigration, the truth, available at gbnews.com.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 5:26. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, ministers are drawing up plans for Texas-style prison reforms that will enable inmates to earn points to reduce their time behind bars by taking part in workshops. Now, Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, plans to visit the US states later this year to see how Britain could mirror its success in reducing its high prison population and rate of reoffending. Now, could Labour solve our overcrowded prison crisis by borrowing an idea from Texas? Well, joining me now to discuss this is the former prisoner and a social campaigner and great friend of the show, all-round top lad, Winston Davis. Winston, always an absolute pleasure, my old son. Now, I wanted to get you on today to talk about this because you are a role model, somebody who served their time, you did your crime, and you turned your life around inside by getting your head down and knuckling and making a better life for yourself. So surely it's music to your ears to learn that other inmates could be offered more incentives for good behaviour, not only to get out sooner, but also to get back to Civvy Street more rounded, more skilled and more ready to engage with the real world.
First of all, thank you for such a great introduction, Martin.
Pleasure.
I'm trying to live that down, or live up to it. In principle, sounds like a good idea. The only thing that I would be concerned about is at the moment people are going through like a box tick exercise to get through courses, to get them to the lower category prisons to get out. And what you don't want is people just going through tick box exercises to say, oh, they've done this course, they've done that, yeah, they're rehabilitated, and really they haven't. We need to get to the nuts and bolts of what are the issues with the offenders and why they're offending from the start when they're in there, and then give them that incentive to say, right, if you work hard like I did, that you can turn your life around and live a decent life and contribute back to society.
You're absolutely right, Winston. Of course, people on any sort of interface with officialdom, like their job seeker, I've been applying for jobs all week, honest gov. People do tell a little porky, to try and get ahead of the queue. That, of course, could happen. There could be people just going along and pretending to be engaged. But nevertheless, Winston, if there was more help, more integration, to do courses, to do retraining, to get a trade inside jails, that surely could only be a good thing.
100%. Funnily enough, I was having a coffee yesterday morning and bumped into a guy who's going up to a prison up in Hemel Hempstead off the back of James Tinson's initiative of the local advisory business boards, hubs. And he's actually a hairdresser. He's going in on Monday, and he said to me, "Oh, what do I do? What?" I said, "You know what? Just the fact of you going in there and showing that you actually care and that you actually think that these people have a potential to do something different, could spark the inside of someone like it did with me. That actually is more than what they're currently experiencing."
And if you're going inside and teaching lags, how to be barbers, obviously there'd be an issue around the scissors, but treating them how to be barbers and whatnot, giving them a practical skill they can take it out into the real world. We're seeing so many bad news stories, Winston. Like yesterday, 37 cons let out early, 5 still at large because of this early release scheme. And the point is, so many being released, 20% of those released a couple of weeks ago are already back inside because a lot of them are homeless. They haven't got anything as a landing pad. So surely, put it to you again, if you've got a trade, if you've got a skill, you're much less likely to reoffend and go back inside and be another social burden.
1,000,000%, Martin. Listen, I'm living proof of it, right? Getting a trade changed my life. Getting a trade allowed me to have a family, to build a business, to do all the things that I'm doing as off the back of a trade, even to this day. Being able to employ people, being able to give back to the community and actually help others that are trying to come through. Massively, training up people has got to be a fundamental part of it, whether it be a trade, whether it be education. But again, for me, physically using my hands was a massive, massive turning point in my life.
And Winston, may I ask you, I haven't asked you before, do you go inside Nick's now? Do you talk to inmates and tell your story and help to mobilise them to be more like you?
Previously, yes, I have. I found in recent years there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of red tape that is preventing people like me being able to get in and do the work. And I've been very, very vocal for a very long time about, you know, what I believe about rehabilitation, about wanting to give back. And I feel like lots of doors are still kept closed. And I put it to anyone watching who's in the prison service that, yeah, 100% reach out to me. I would love to go in and give back and help others that are trying to turn their life around, because there's some that are.
I think that was Winston Davis just offering his services. He's available for hire. His CV is there, and you can contact him via GBNews. And Winston, we're going to go for that beer soon, mate. It'd be great to talk to you and see if I can help you get you in some Nick's, mate, 'cause I know people are going to listen to you. Winston Davis, always an absolute pleasure. Cheers. Lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, including more reactions to Keir Starmer's failing to guarantee that homeless veterans will be put ahead of asylum seekers in housing waiting lists, and astonishing exclusive buyers, and something we intend to act upon. But first is your latest news headlines with Mark White.
Good evening. It's just after 5:30. The latest headlines from the GB News Centre. Scotland Yard has issued a call for any potential victims of Mohammed Al-Fayed to come forward. 5 women have claimed they were raped by the former Harrods owner, who died last year at the age of 94. A number of others say they were sexually assaulted by him. The current managing director of Harrods has apologised and said the business failed colleagues. Michael Ward, who worked for Mohammed Al-Fayed for 4 years, said he was not aware of his criminality and abuse, but described it as a shameful period in Harrods' history. Israeli forces have carried out airstrikes in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, today. We are looking at live images over Beirut tonight as intense cross-border fighting continues. Security sources said the strike on the Lebanese capital targeted and killed a senior Hezbollah commander. It comes as the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his military to keep fighting with full force. The Lebanese Health Ministry claims dozens have been killed so far in today's strikes. The family of a teenager who was murdered in Wolverhampton have told a court they're devastated, totally heartbroken and confused. 2 12-year-old boys found guilty of murdering Sean Sisahai in a random machete attack are being sentenced this week. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old, who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a fractured skull in November last year. They're believed to be the youngest defendants convicted of murder in Britain since Robert Thompson and John Venables, both aged 11, were found guilty of killing 2-year-old James Bolger in 1993. British, US and Australian defence ministers have been meeting in London to discuss ambitious plans to build the next generation of attack submarines. John Healey hosted US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin and Australia's Defence Minister Richard Marles as the Tri-Nation Initiative takes the next step towards building the submarines. The Ministry of Defence says the deal to build nuclear-powered but conventionally armed attack submarines would help support more than 21,000 jobs in the UK alone. And finally, astronomers have unveiled the most detailed map ever seen of our galaxy. From the violent birth of newborn stars to the hidden mysteries of the galactic core, these new images show the Milky Way as you've never seen it before. The map is the culmination of more than 13 years of observations. Astronomers used infrared light from the European Southern Observatory to peer through the dust and gas which normally hides the centre of the galaxy. You're right up to date with all the latest headlines. We're back with more at 6.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Yet more rain to come for many of us during the rest of the day and overnight. Very heavy in some places and at a risk of flooding, particularly for those areas that were flooded earlier in the week. And that's because this front, which has been bringing persistent rain to Northern Ireland and Northern England through the day, moves south during the evening and merges with an area of intense thundery downpours across Wales and central England. And as that happens, in just a few hours, we could see 40 to 60 millimetres of additional rain on top of what we saw last weekend and the start of this week. So an amber warning in force, risk of localised flooding, risk of transport disruption as we begin the day on Friday. Now, by dawn, the wettest conditions will be moving south, so affecting Kent, Sussex, perhaps parts of Hampshire, as well as heavy showers move in from the Channel. It does begin to dry up elsewhere and clearer skies coming through across Wales, Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. A cold start to the day here under those clear skies. A few showers for northern Scotland, but in between there will be bright skies, and we keep that cold wind in Scotland, but during the morning it extends further south. And it does help to clear the rain, so we say farewell to that by mid to late morning. But, well, it's going to feel chilly as that northerly wind sets in. There'll be further showers carried through on that wind, predominantly across northern and western coast, but a few popping up inland as well. Temperatures of 14 or 15 Celsius, though, not feeling particularly warm at all. And then into the evening, the showers inland tend to ease away. Lengthy clear spells developing away from northern and western coast, where those showers will carry on. And where we've got the clear skies inland, of course, temperatures will drop. A touch of ground frost possible first thing this weekend, so a chilly start, but a fine day for many on Saturday before more wind and rain arrives from the west on Sunday.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Johnny Ratner. There are long delays heading south down the M6 through Lancashire, where the motorway is down to a single lane from junction 31 to 30 towards the M61 to the east of Preston at the scene of a multi-vehicle collision. And 3 motorways are blocked this afternoon. First of all, the M40 in Buckinghamshire blocked southbound from junction 4 to 3 south of High Wycombe following an accident. The M25 in Kent is closed clockwise from the M26 on towards 6 at Godstone over the Surrey border. Accident investigation work continues. And in Kent, the M26 is also shut London bound up to the M25 following an accident. Long delays on the M4 eastbound from junction 45 to 44 heading away from Swansea, where one lane's closed for recovery work following an accident. And that's the very latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 5:38. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Sir Keir Starmer told GB News yesterday that he cannot guarantee that veterans will be placed ahead of other groups in housing waiting lists, including, astonishingly, even asylum seekers. Well, let's discuss this further now with the Chief Executive of the First Light Trust, Dorinda Wolfe-Murray. Her charity offers support to those who have served in the armed forces. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Dorinda. Dorinda, about an hour ago, I was joined by a former veteran, Jamie Micklefield, who is clearly suffering from PTSD. I was moved to tears by his story of how he felt abandoned after he left the forces. Hundreds and hundreds of viewers have been in touch, just saying how moved they are by the plight of people like Jamie. But to you, Dorinda, this must be depressingly commonplace. People back on civvy streets, not offered the support that many, many people tell us they deserve. Can I get your reaction initially to the Home for Heroes initiative? I think all of us thought, wow, fantastic. At last, the precise kind of thing that veterans need. However, upon close examination, not all it was cut up to be. First, can I get your take on that?
I've been travelling today, so I haven't heard the whole story. You are absolutely right. The picture is complicated in so very many ways. It's a whole heap of mess, if I'm really honest. The housing situation is not great. The mental health trauma situation is complicated by other things. Trust broken so many times by so many different people in so many different fields. Understanding of trauma and its effect on us has changed dramatically over the years. The difficulty of having honest conversations about the complications that, I mean, this is sort of like a reverse process, but I was on a social platform, which I tend to avoid at all costs, but there was a conversation about exactly this, homelessness. And the conversation was, everybody should be offered a home. And I was like, yeah, they should be. But what you've also got to realise is that not everybody can cope with it. And the person came back and said, I simply couldn't understand how nobody would want to have a roof over their head. I mean, how is that even possible? And that's the complication, is that it isn't possible for everybody, not only because there aren't all the perfect houses everywhere, but also, too, when you've been through the awful stuff that so many people have been through who've served and seen horrendous situations, the one that we never talk about, Northern Ireland, Bosnia, all the awfulness whereby you've been often you don't know who to trust. Never mind, you just don't. And you can't, to some people, they simply can't be within four walls. And that whole thing about being responsible and being able to deal with stuff just isn't possible. So when people talk about homelessness, it's so much more than the roof, and trying to enable people to understand that actually it's a long path. It's not a fixable thing by, here's your house, we need more of these, we need more of this. Yes, that's part of it, but it's so much more than that. And when you've got older people who, I was inspired by what Winston was saying. Timpson's huge. We used to have one of the directors of Timpson's, one of our trustees. They do amazing work. And, that whole practicality piece, which is like, you've got to be practical about the housing thing. If you're having enough trouble coping with triggers that set you off, and all sorts of things can do that, and God above, I mean, that's what we deal with. Putting somebody into a house that could be in a wrong neighbourhood, could be in a situation whereby they can't understand what's going on, whereby they're trying to go on the straight and narrow, but of course you've got limited housing, you've got drugs around you, and you've got loud noises going on, or you're with people who have a whole different mindset. It makes it much more difficult to do it proactively and in the correct way possible. My sort of cri de coeur always is, it's like the house is part of the solving of it, but much more important than that is the correct support alongside that. And for that, you need people working face-to-face in communities who understand what makes the warp and the weft of the community. And I realise that hasn't answered your question wholly by any stretch of the imagination, but it isn't. Everybody thinks that as soon as you've got a house, that solves the problem. Ironically, that can be the start of the problem. I mean, we were involved with a phenomenal initiative about building homes for veterans. And one of the veterans who was, I'm certainly not going to name names, nor am I going to name places, because that's
sure.
Simply because of how they'd been living and surviving, could not cope with more than one room. It didn't matter how gorgeous it was, didn't matter how much support and how much, just couldn't do that. And I know people who've moved in houses and just can't even cope with working out how to pay the bills. And then the responsibility of keeping everything okay. Sometimes it's so much easier to sofa surf and be homeless. And that's not to say it's right, and that's not to say that I'm making excuses, but it is not an easy answer to anything. And throwing big headlines at it, and we've all had the politicians from every side of everything throw big headlines at it, throw big bits of money at it that sit at a top end and don't get trickled down. And we've had years of that. This is not, I want to make this really clear, this is not a political thing. This is an understanding of social and people. And it's as true, dear God, for the veterans and those who've served and all the people that we support, which are also the emergency services like the paramedics, who see horrendous trauma and cope. But
okay, we have to leave it there.
Makes it difficult.
We have to leave it there. Dorinda Wolfe-Murray, absolutely fascinating, wonderful to hear your expertise. Thank you so much for giving us some insight and sharing that with us. Honestly, I find that absolutely amazing. Thank you. And thanks for the work you do and thanks for the support you offer to our veterans. We have to continue this conversation. It's just so fascinating and important. Now, as Keir Starmer once again jets off to New York, a new report shows the globe-trotting Prime Minister will rack up an astonishing, guess how many air miles? I'll keep that a secret. What will Ed Miliband have to say about Jet Set Starmer's planet-sized carbon footprint? That's next. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News.
I'm Isabel Webster. Thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
I've got a question for you here, Mr. Motivator. Each time I will try and do a Couch to 5K, and I start, and then it stops, and then I'll have another go. It's baby steps, though, for most of us, isn't it? You've got to start slow, because I also see people go out and run, do that, and then do too much, and they get completely exhausted and think, I can't do this anymore. So what is it? You have to start slowly, right? Is that fair?
Well, with everything that you do need to start slowly. But what's more important than that? You need to identify an activity that suits you. Now, the thing is, you may want to do Couch to 5K, but let's say you have a preponderance for swimming. Maybe swimming is what you really like, or dancing is what you like. You find the activity that suits you. And I have to say, you'll never see a happy jogger. They're happy afterwards. They have enjoyed the experience, but they're not happy whilst doing it. But you must start with everything.
Have you ever been out of shape, though? Because whilst I find you really inspiring, I feel as though you've always been in good nick, and therefore it's kind of come easy to you. Whereas I think, there are plenty of people who have a tendency to put on weight. I mean, I can look at chocolate and I feel like I put on weight. And it's a slog, especially if you've taken your foot off the gas for a while. Getting back into it's brutal. What do you know about that?
Well, let me just say this to you, that in the early days, and I can go back, don't forget 71 years, our activity level was much higher. But this is something that's really just happened in the last 30 years. So those 30 years, we have changed. We now spend more time in front of the computer. We spend more time sitting down. So that's why we need gyms and we need to get up. Now, gyms don't suit everybody. And that's why I do free classes. Free club, you can join. Everyone can get access to movement in their home. But you have got to make that first step.
GB News, the People's Channel.
the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 10-6. Bit of fun now. Around the world in 80 days. Well, Sir Keir Starmer has racked up a huge amount of air miles. I won't spoil it just yet, since he assumed office in July. Now, will this in any way undermine his attempts to bring the country with him as he seeks to get the UK to reach net zero? Because bear in mind, we've got a certain Ed Miliband who seems to share the politics of a certain Greta Thunberg. They go around, don't they, telling us to stop driving our cars. They tell us not to go on holiday, to turn off our central heating, sometimes by, I don't know, cancelling the winter fuel allowance. So they can't even turn the heating on, or they're afraid to turn the heating on if they're pensioners. And yet they seem to lead jet-set lifestyles themselves. Now, the Prime Minister has been on what can only be described as a whirlwind tour around the planet since being elected. Now, I know, it's official business. It's important that our Prime Minister takes part in these meetings himself. But how about he does it via Zoom? How about he gets there in a more carbon-friendly manner? Because that's what they'd expect us to do, as they price us off the roads with their ULEZ schemes, their clean air schemes, their low traffic neighbourhoods. And by the way, we might be taxing you to fly in the future, so only the rich and famous can afford it. Going back to the 1970s, remember those days? I do. Cheap holidays became available and it opened up the world for the working classes. Do the political class want to close that world down? It won't affect the rich. The rich people like Sir Keir Starmer, like our political classes, they'll still be jetting around the world. It won't bother them. It won't bother Prince Harry. It won't bother all those hectoring A-list celebrities, the ones that tell us, oh, we should be smaller with our carbon footprint, while they get in first class on their jumbo jets and ponce off around the world. It doesn't bother them, but they expect us to live differently. The detail of this story is absolutely astonishing when you look at the countries Sir Keir Starmer has been to. I'm going to dive into a bit of this detail now as we wait for our guest to appear. So by the end of Sir Keir Starmer's Global Tour 2024, he will have visited, guess how many countries? 13 trips to 8 countries in just 20 weeks. And let's go through this now. USA. 3 trips to the USA, and he's there as we speak in the Big Apple. No doubt got there very comfortably, perhaps even business class. Germany, twice to the fatherland. France, twice. Ireland, Italy, Samoa, Hungary, Brazil, Azerbaijan. Those are the countries that our Prime Minister will be going to, and in fact, he will have circumnavigated the globe. Guess how many times? 2.5 times around the world. Phileas Fogg eats your heart out. Around the world in 80 days, Sir Keir Starmer has been around the world 2.5 times in less time. And guess what? Not a beep. Not a beep from Ed Miliband. Not a sausage. It seems OK. And here is the payoff. Guess how many miles Sir Keir Starmer will have racked up by the end of the year? 64,730 miles for air miles, Starmer, and of course his Mrs. Lady Victoria. Now, before we end the show, I want to go through some your says. We've had a massive reaction to our campaign to help Homes for Heroes. We had Jamie on the show, Jamie Micklefield. A viewer says this: please pass on my heartfelt thanks to Jamie. We treat our service personnel appallingly. They should be at the top of every list for help and support. And Leslie says this: what a brilliant and emotional interview, Martin, you just had with an ex-Forces person suffering from PTSD. It made me cry. They absolutely need our help. Thank you. And there are hundreds and hundreds more. Just don't have time to go through it. So next up is Tubes & Co, 6 till 7. Now, I'm going to be back at 7 p.m. this evening. I'm covering for Nigel Farage again. And, of course, I'm back tomorrow at 3 o'clock. We've got some fantastic guests on the Nigel Farage show, continuing that ludicrous story that they want less white men in the Welsh Parliament. Not on my watch. We're going to make sure they get it in the neck. I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News. I'll see you at 7.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Yet more rain to come for many of us during the rest of the day and overnight. Very heavy in some places and at a risk of flooding, particularly for those areas that were flooded earlier in the week. And that's because this front, which has been bringing persistent rain to Northern Ireland and Northern England through the day, moves south during the evening and merges with an area of intense thundery downpours across Wales and central England. And as that happens, in just a few hours, we could see 40 to 60 millimetres of additional rain on top of what we saw last weekend and the start of this week. So an amber warning in force, risk of localised flooding, risk of transport disruption as we begin the day on Friday. Now, by dawn, the wettest conditions will be moving south, so affecting Kent, Sussex, perhaps parts of Hampshire, as well as heavy showers move in from the Channel. It does begin to dry up elsewhere and clearer skies coming through across Wales, Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. A cold start to the day here under those clear skies. A few showers for northern Scotland, but in between there will be bright skies, and we keep that cold wind in Scotland, but during the morning it extends further south. And it does help to clear the rain, so we say farewell to that by mid to late morning. But, well, it's going to feel chilly as that northerly wind sets in. There'll be further showers carried through on that wind, predominantly across northern and western coast, but a few popping up inland as well. Temperatures of 14 or 15 Celsius, though, not feeling particularly warm at all. And then into the evening, the showers inland tend to ease away. Lengthy clear spells developing away from northern and western coast, where those showers will carry on. And where we've got the clear skies inland, of course, temperatures will drop. A touch of ground frost possible first thing this weekend, so a chilly start, but a fine day for many on Saturday before more wind and rain arrives from the west on Sunday.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Long queues continue on the M6, heading south through Lancashire. The motorway's down to a single lane on that 3-lane stretch from junction 31 to 30 towards the M61 east of Preston. Recovery works underway following an accident. On the M1 heading out of London, the motorway is partly blocked to junction 6, the North Watford exit, because of flooding. Long queues down towards 4 at Edgware and on the Barnet bypass as you divert through the city. On the Kent stretch of the M25, the motorway is closed clockwise from the M26 to 6 at Godson for accident investigation work, where the M26 itself is also closed London bound towards the M25. And the Surrey stretch of the M25 really slow anti-clockwise 8-7 towards the M23 following a collision that's now on the hard shoulder, and queues on the M4 eastbound north of Swansea following an accident earlier on. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, GB